in person, and it's really pissing people off, and I love it.
There's 5 people watching the stream right now, even though nothing's happening. I love this so much.
It's back, boys!
Are we back? Wait, send the link again. Send a new link.
Is it a new link?
It might not be.
I think it's the new link.
It is a new link. Okay, here you go.
Yeah.
APUSH with the boys!
APUSH with the boys!
With the boys.
With the boys!
Wait, you disabled chat.
No! Wait, no you didn't. Chat works.
I have chat disabled.
It works.
What?
Whoa,
it
Nick,
says
you
chat is
posted that house
disabled.
thing in the Discord. Whoa, wanky. Look, it's
Nick,
just like
it
a board.
says chat is disabled for this stream.
Why is chat disabled for the stream?
Let us go! You ready? Alright.
Ryan's talking in the chat. I don't know what you're talking about. Are you on the new
Here,
link?
Wait, Ryan's talking in the
Oh,
chat. I
is
don't
there
see that.
another one?
Yeah, cause oh yeah, you sent it to the APUSH chat. Whoops. Oh no, Daniel said it.
Ryan's not
We're
in
chilling.
chat. What?
Ryan
No,
said.
I'm the only one that's commented so far. Oh, y'all, if you can hear us, comment like hi in the chat.
I think Ryan said hi in chat.
Not in the YouTube live one.
Is Ryan gonna be, everyone can hear all of us, right?
Yeah.
Can
I
y'all
think.
hear us?
Oh,
Ryan,
now
can you
I
hear
see
everyone?
that.
And
Can
or
you-
Charlotte or whoever. Hey, Charlotte's here.
There's 6 people watching. Oh yeah, let's go. All right, y'all ready for this? Wait, let me. You guys, put this on your Instagram. Spread
Okay,
the
you can
word.
hear
We want to
everyone,
get as
okay.
many people possible.
Oh my
Just like
gosh.
share this out. Make us viral. Make us go viral. Let's go.
So
Actually,
dumb.
I'm sorry.
I love it.
Patrick.
It's Patrick.
Patrick.
Daddy!
Oh gosh, I hate that so much.
This is horrid.
Hi, Patrick.
Hi, Patrick.
You know, even though you're not here, I can still feel your thighs just bursting through the internet.
What on earth?
I don't like that. I don't like that at all. Can you help me on my mouth too?
All right, everybody ready? Are we gonna?
Wait, one second.
Estoy listo.
Should we stop everything and help Patrick with math?
No, we're not.
I think we should just go. We've been waiting.
I'm joking.
We've like spent an hour setting this up.
Wait, one second. How do I add a link? One second.
I narrowly avoided a swarm of tortoises, and now we're here.
No. Link. Get back here. One second. I'm working on it. Give me a sec. Heck. Wait. Shoot. Wait. How do I add a link to a Instagram live post?
Wait, what are you?
No,
What
it's
are you-
not an Instagram live post.
I'm here, Ryan.
Oh, you can't actually add links, so I would go and just put it in your bio or something and say link in bio. Because that's what people do.
You know what? Actually, yeah, sure. One second.
Who is John? John Erickson?
John Erickson.
Why is it John?
You're John.
I guess I'm John now.
One second. I'm almost done with the advertisement post.
All right, who's our reader tonight?
I am the reader. Wait, Nick, we're not starting yet. 1 second. Give me a moment.
Oh, also, somebody in chat, is, like, the audio levels, are they good? Is anybody
Should we-
too loud? Am I quieter
all
than the
like-
others, actually?
I have you fine in mind, but
It, like, matters.
obviously
to
that
them.
All right, I got. We're live streaming the APUSH chapter, being read out loud. Wait. Oh gosh. All right, let's go. Wait, how did I put the link in cryo? Okay, what's wrong with my mic? People are making fun of my mic. No hate comments allowed.
Daniel's mic is godly.
Yeah.
Mike,
All right, I just posted this on my story, so we might be getting like a story.
Wait, I need to look at the live viewer count. 1 second. We're at 10?
Yeah, and I have like
Yeah.
400 plus followers, so I might get like a decent amount of people here. 1 second.
Who's watching?
Wait, is the stream good quality? Oh, it's horrid. My bad, guys.
It's
Let's go.
1080, it's fine.
Can I make this stream a little bit higher of a bitrate?
It's 1080p.
Well, probably not if you want it to be this fast. So
Wait, settings, auto. It's not even it's at 360p. No, it supports up to 1080p at 60
Ryan
fps.
says it looks fine, Lamau.
Looks
It
fine,
looks
Lamau.
fine, Lamau.
Okay, well next time I'm sure it'll be even godlier. Wait, video bitrate for 1080p is 8,000 kilobits per second.
Alright, I threw it up in my I put it up in my bio. Oh gosh.
Dang.
Alright, y'all ready for this? We have 10 people watching. This is something.
Oh, I have a problem, guys. I
Yeah.
can't have the live stream up and
No, you
my
just
notes
need
and
the
the
live
chapter.
Josh, I'm doing fine with 2 monitors, so I think you can be quiet.
Sorry. And like Discord and all. Fine, I'll just put your live stream in half my bad screen.
Fine.
Alright, I
Alright,
set
y'all
the
ready?
bit rate to 4,500, so that should
Okay.
bop it up a
Is
bit.
everybody ready? Alright.
Yes, Daniel.
Alright.
Oh wait,
it.
this is what I use my iPad for.
So, Nick, we're starting the APUSH chapter. Order, what chapter? Alright. The American Yawp.
Oh crap.
Chapter 20.
Let's go.
The Great Depression.
No.
7:11 p.m. February 25th, 2020. Alright. Section 1. I. Dot.
No, please don't say
Introduction.
I dot. If you're gonna read them,
What?
read them as numerals. Yeah, okay, there we go.
Like,
Alright. The wonders of the stock market permeated popular culture in the 1920s. Although it was released during the first year of the Great Depression, the 1930 film High Society Blues captures the speculative hope and prosperity of the previous decade. I'm in the market for you, a popular musical number from the film, even used the stock market as a metaphor for love. You're going up, up, up in my estimation. I want 1,000 shares of your caresses too. We'll count the hugs and kisses when dividends are due, cause I'm
This
in
is
the
horrible
market
singing.
for you.
We gotta listen to that song now.
But just actually, yeah, we're doing that as soon as we're on the introduction.
You're going
But
up,
just as the
up,
song-
up in my
I got it,
estimation.
1929, the stock market reached the apex of its swift climb, crashed, and brought an abrupt end to the seeming prosperity of the Roaring '20s. The Great Depression had arrived, aka junior year. Let's go.
Alright, the stock market climbed and then crashed in 1929. There isn't actually that much in the intro, that's kind of funny.
there's
Are we ready for the next section?
Ending the roaring 20s. Yeah, sure.
Alright.
That is
The
like the shortest
origins?
intro paragraph I've ever actually taken.
Yeah,
notes
it
on.
was really bad.
Section 2. The origins of the Great Depression. On Thursday, October 24th, 1929, stock market prices suddenly plummeted. $10 billion in investments, roughly equivalent to about $100 billion today, disappeared in a matter of hours. Panicked selling set in. Stock values sank to sudden lows, and stunned investors crowded the New York Stock Exchange, demanding answers. Leading bankers met privately at the offices of J.P. Morgan and raised millions in personal and institutional contributions to halt the slide. They marched across the street. Prices.
Okay, there we go.
The market temporarily stabilized, but fears spread over the weekend, and the following week, frightened investors dumped their portfolios to avoid further losses. On October 29, Black Tuesday, the stock market began its long, precipitous fall. Stock values evaporated. Shares of U.S. Steel dropped from $262 to $22. General Motors stock fell from $73 a share to $8.
Damn.
4/5 of J.D. Rockefeller's fortune, the greatest in American history, vanished.
Aw, poor
Dun
thing.
dun dun. Although the crash stunned the nation, it exposed the deeper underlying problems with the American economy in the 1920s. The stock market's popularity grew throughout the decade, but only 2.5% of Americans had brokerage accounts. The overwhelming majority of Americans had no direct personal stake in the Wall Street. The stock market's collapse, no matter how dramatic, did not by itself depress the American economy. Instead, the crash exposed a great number of factors that, when combined with the financial panic, sank the American economy into the greatest of all economic crises. Rising inadequately, declining demand,
Inequality.
world collapse, overextended investors, and the bursting of speculative bubbles all conspired to plunge the nation into the Great Depression.
Okay, wait a second.
Yeah, hold on.
We sure are.
We're on the same wavelength. We just said the exact same.
Bro, Rory Meekin's
We
in the
should get some
chat.
Row.
like background music.
Rory Meekin. Let's go.
As long as it's not Daniel choosing it.
Row
No,
Meekin.
we gotta play this.
We do have to play this.
Get the APUSH vibe in.
Guys, if you pop out the chat on the YouTube studio dashboard, it says, "The chat is not here. We popped out."
Wait, are you turning on the song?
What
Are we
song?
doing this? Are we just going on? Y'all ready?
I mean, I can do a song if you guys really want.
Hold on,
Oh,
Nick.
yeah, notice you're also
Do the one
Alright. Anyways, I'm moving on. Despite resistance by progressives, the vast gap between rich and poor accelerated throughout the early 20th century. In the aggregate, Americans were better off in 1929 than in 1920. Per capita, income had risen 10% for all Americans, but 75% of the nation's wealthiest citizens. Or 75% for the nation's wealthiest citizens. The return of conservative politics in the 1920s reinforced federal fiscal policies that exacerbated the divide. Low corporate and personal taxes, easy credit, and depressed interest rates overwhelmingly favored wealthy investors who, flush with cash, spent their money on luxury goods and speculative investments in the rapidly rising stock market.
What does this even mean?
The pro-business policies of the 1920s were designed for an American economy built on the production and consumption of durable goods. Yet, by the late 1920s, much of the market was saturated. The boom of automobile manufacturing, the great driver of the American economy in the 1920s, slowed as fewer and fewer Americans with the means to purchase a car had not already done so. More and more, the well-to-do had no need for new automobiles, radios, and other consumer goods that fueled gross domestic product (GDP) growth in the 1920s. When products failed to sell, inventories piled up. Manufacturers scaled back production, and companies fired workers, stripping potential consumers of cash, blunting demand for consumer goods, and replicating the downward economic cycle. The situation was only compounded by increased automation and rising efficiency in American factories. Despite impressive overall growth throughout the 1920s, unemployment hovered at around 7% throughout the decade, suppressing purchasing power for a great swath of potential customers. Why is this section so long?
Whoa.
We have a cool little picture of like a car now, and we're going to move on to the next paragraph now.
Okay, I'm taking really bad notes, but it's
For
fine.
American farmers, meanwhile, hard times began long before the markets crashed. In 1920 and 1921, after several years of larger than average profits,
Y'all.
farm prices in the South and West continued their long decline, plummeting as production climbed
Y'all, I
and
gotta
domestic
eat.
and international demand for cotton,
But I'll
foodstuffs.
keep you guys on the stream.
Okay.
Wait, what?
I gotta eat.
You said
No, Nick, don't leave. Nick,
I have to eat. It's a thing I must do.
that's fake.
Nah.
Alright, we're gonna move on without you, Nick. We'll miss you.
I'm sorry. Okay, bye. Wait, actually, does somebody have notes they want to share with me so I can stream their
Yeah, we
notes?
can just share the
I
next
shared
one.
all my notes with you.
Yeah, we already shared it in the Discord.
Oh,
Alright.
okay. Sick.
For American farmers, meanwhile, hard times began long before the markets crashed. In 1920 and 1921, after several years of larger than average profits, farm prices in the South and West continued their long decline, plummeting as production climbed and domestic and international demand for cotton, foodstuffs, and other agricultural products stalled. Widespread soil exhaustion on Western farms only compounded the problem. Farmers found themselves unable to make payments on loans taken out during the good years, and banks in agricultural areas tightened credit in response. By 1929, farm families were overextended, in no shape to make up for declining consumption, and a precarious economic position even before the Depression wrecked the global economy. Who's playing music?
Josh, your notes aren't in the folder.
Who's music? in?
Okay, I'll fix it.
Is somebody playing
Thank you.
I'm in the
Or
Market
somebody else
for
can share their
You?
notes, whoever
Yeah.
is more confident.
Go, Nick! Woo!
Nick, they are. They're definitely there.
What are they
Oh
called?
my gosh, it's Estrella in the chat. Alright, anyways,
Chapter
we're on to the
22, the
next
Great
section.
Depression.
Alright, next paragraph.
Oh,
Alright.
it's chapter 23, Josh.
Despite
Okay.
Hey, Nick,
Here,
quiet coyote.
let me fix
Alright.
that real quick.
Despite serious
23.
foundational problems. What? Are you playing the song still?
Yeah.
Alright, we're taking a quick break to listen to a 1920s historical era piece song, and we'll be back with our live stream in a second. Alright, play it, Nick.
No, okay.
Oh, this is my funny music.
Nick, go to Discord settings and make it so that your volume is always on.
This is actually like the worst audio quality ever. This is so good. Alright, that was great. Next up. Despite serious... Never mind, not next up. Wait, what? Is it still going? That's not alright. Alright. Despite serious foundational problems in the industrial and agricultural economy, most Americans in 1929 and 1930 still believed the economy would bounce back. In 1930, amid one of the Depression's many false hopes, President Herbert Hoover, they named the Hoover Dam in Nevada after him. Fun history facts with Daniel, sorry. President Herbert Hoover reassured an audience that the Depression is over. But the president was not simply guilty of false optimism. Hoover made many mistakes. During his 1928 election campaign, Hoover promoted higher tariffs as a means of encouraging domestic consumption and protecting American farmers from foreign competition. Spurred by the ongoing agricultural depression, Hoover signed into law the highest tariff in American history, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff of 1930. Just as global markets began to crumble, other countries responded in kind. Tariffs walls rose across the globe, and international trade ground to a halt. Between 1929 and 1932, international trade dropped from $36 billion to only $12 billion. Now that's a big drop right there. American exports fell by 78%. Combined with overproduction and declining domestic consumption, the tariff exacerbated the world's economic collapse. Why does this textbook use exacerbated so much?
Because it's a great word.
I mean, sure is. But beyond structural flaws, speculative bubbles, and destructive protectionism, the final contributing element of the Great Depression was a quintessentially human one: panic. The frantic reactions to the market's fall aggravated the economy's many other failings. More economic policies backfired. The Federal Reserve overcorrected in their response to speculation by raising interest rates and tightening credit. Across the country, banks denied loans and called in debts. Their patrons, afraid that reactionary policies meant further financial trouble, rushed to withdraw money before institutions could close their doors, ensuing their fate. Such bank runs were not uncommon in the 1920s, but in 1930, with the economy worsening and panic from the crash accelerating, 1,352 banks failed. In 1932, nearly 2,300 banks collapsed, taking personal deposits, savings, and credit with them. The Great Depression was the confluence of many problems, most of which had begun during a time of unprecedented economic growth. Fiscal policies of the Republican business presidents undoubtedly widened the gap between rich and poor and fostered a standard over international trade. But such policies were widely popular and for much of the decade widely seen as the source of the decade's explosive growth. With fortune to be won and standards of living to maintain, few Americans had the foresight or wherewithal to repudiate an age of easy credit, rampant consumerism, and wild speculation. Instead, as the Depression worked its way across the United States, Americans hoped to weather their economic storms as best they could, waiting for some form of relief, any answer to the ever-mounting economic collapse that strangled so many American lives. Section 2, complete.
Hold on. Okay, yeah, you can do that.
Wow, that was. If you're following the key terms like in order, they're not in chronological.
They were in order this chapter or last chapter.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
I'm just asking if.
What?
It's Daniel's mic.
No, it's yours. Thanks.
No,
Wait, no, it's
Daniel's.
Daniel's.
Look at Discord.
Wait, what's on my mic? Am I
Mic
echoing?
is echoing. Yeah, you should switch to.
How's everyone doing?
Alright, y'all, I'm gonna switch to my AirPods. Give me a sec.
Actually, no, Daniel, don't, because then nobody can hear you.
Oh, that's true. Never mind. I'm gonna stay on my mic then.
Because Nick can't change his settings right now. Hold on, taking notes still.
Alright, let me know when you're ready for section 3.
I'm ready.
We ready? Oh my gosh, Aiden Rice is here. Let's get this bread. You know what? We're not using my AirPods. We're using other cool stuff. IDK.
Daniel, just try and keep your mic away from your speaker.
It's literally just one thing. Like, it's a mic and a speaker combined.
What?
I think.
That's
I don't know.
so
How,
weird.
Josh, I don't know how technology works.
Okay.
Technology's wacky, man.
Yeah, I think I'm fine.
Y'all ready? Alright.
Yeah.
Section 3. Oh wait, Nick's thing is frozen where we are.
It's
Shoot.
fine.
Okay, well Nick will fix it when he gets there. Alright. Section 3. Herbert Hoover and the politics of the Depression. There's a cool little picture of like guys with donuts. Epic.
Hell yeah.
Alright. As the Depression spread, public blame settled on President Herbert Hoover and the conservative politics of the Republican Party. But Hoover was as much victim as perpetrator. a man who had the misfortune of becoming a visible symbol for a large invisible force. In 1928, Hoover had no reason to believe that his presidency would be any different than that of his predecessor, Calvin Coolidge, whose time in office was marked by relative government inaction, seemingly rampant prosperity, and high approval ratings. Coolidge had decided not to seek a second term in 1928. A man of few words, Silent Cal, publicized this decision by handing a scrap of paper to a reporter that simply read, "I do not choose to run for president in 1928. The race, therefore, became a contest between the Democratic governor of New York, Al Smith, whose Catholic faith and immigrant backgrounds aroused nativist suspicions and whose connections to Tammany Hall and anti-prohibition politics offended reformers, and the Republican candidate Herbert Hoover, whose all-American, Midwestern, Protestant background and managerial prowess during World War I endeared him to American voters. Hoover epitomized the self-made man. Orphaned at age 9, he was raised by a strict Quaker uncle on the West Coast. He graduated from Stanford University in 1895 and worked as an engineer for several multinational mining companies. He became a household name during World War I, when he oversaw voluntary rationing as the head of the U.S. Food Administration, and after the armistice served as the Director General of the American Relief Association in Europe. Hoover's reputation for humanitarian service and problem-solving translated into popular support, even as the public soured on Wilson's progressive activism. However, Hoover was one of the few politicians whose career benefited from wartime public service. After the war, both the Democrat and Republican parties tried to draft him to run for president in 1920. That's a popular dude right there. Hoover declined to run in 1920 and in 1924. He served instead as Secretary of Commerce under both Harding and Coolidge, taking an active role in all aspects of government. In 1928, he seemed the natural successor to Coolidge. Politically, aside from the issue of prohibition, he was a dry, Smith a wet. Hoover's platform diverted very little from Smith, leaving little to discuss during their campaigns except personality and religion. Both benefited Hoover. Smith's background engendered opposition from otherwise solid Democratic states, especially in the South, where his Catholic, ethnic, urban, and anti-prohibition background were anathema. His popularity among urban ethnic voters counted for little. Several Southern states, in part owing to the work of itinerant evangelical politicking, voted Republican for the first time since Reconstruction. Hoover won in a landslide, taking nearly 60% of the popular vote. Although Hoover is sometimes categorized as a business president in line with his Republican predecessors, he also embraced an inherent business progressivism, a system of voluntary action called associationalism. That's important, write that down. That assumed Americans could maintain a web of voluntary cooperative organizations dedicated to providing economic assistance and services to those in need. Businesses, the thinking went, would willingly limit harmful practice for the greater economic good. To Hoover, direct government aid would discourage a healthy work ethic, while associationalism would encourage the self-control and self-initiative that fueled economic growth. But when the Depression exposed the incapacity of such strategies to produce an economic recovery, Hoover proved insufficiently flexible to recognize the limits of his ideology. And when the ideology failed, so too did his presidency. Hoover entered office on a wave of popular support, but by October 1929, the economic collapse had overwhelmed his presidency. Like all too many Americans, Hoover and his advisors assumed, or perhaps simply hoped, that the sharp financial and economic decline was a temporary downturn, another bust of the inevitable boom-bust cycles that stretched back through America's commercial history. Many economists argued that periodic busts culled weak firms and paved the way for future growth. And so when suffering Americans looked to Hoover for help, Hoover could only answer with volunteerism. He asked business leaders to promise to maintain investments and employment and encourage state and local charities to assist those in need. Hoover established the President's Organization for Unemployment Relief, or POOR, to help organize the efforts of private agencies. While POOR urged charitable giving, charitable relief organizations were overwhelmed by the growing needs of the many multiplying unemployed, underfed, and unhoused Americans. By mid-1932, for instance, a quarter of all of New York's private charities closed. They had simply run out of money. In Atlanta, solvent relief charities could only provide $1.30 per week to needy families. The size and scope of the Depression overpowered the radically insufficient capacity of private volunteer organizations to mediate the crisis. By 1932, with the economy long since stagnant and re-election campaign looming, Hoover, hoping to stimulate American industry, created the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, RFC, to provide emergency loans to banks, building and loan societies, railroads, and other private industries. It was radical in its use of direct government aid and out of character for the normally laissez-faire Hoover, but it also bypassed needy Americans to bolster industrial and financial interests. New York Congressman Fiorello LaGuardia, who later served as mayor of New York City, captured public sentiment when he denounced the RFC as a millionaire's dole. Section 3 complete.
Wait, hold up.
Yep.
Break time. Everyone should be taking notes.
Everyone should be taking notes,
Except for Daniel.
Right.
except for me, because I don't take notes.
Yeah, because you're a god. Fortunately, I must not have massive brains like you. So take notes.
Okay, so I'm just taking like general notes. So Nick, I think I'm just gonna like take your bullet points for each of the different bullet points. Reading about yourself in Yawp Chapter 23, Nick? What? What?
What? Oh shoot, I think my Instagram post just deleted itself. Heck, wait.
No
Wait.
self-promotion, Daniel.
What?
I'm kidding, I don't know.
Why didn't it work? Oh. Good job. Oh, thank you, Estrella. Alright.
Is
Gotta
Estrella
hydrate.
here?
Estrella is here.
What? Hey. Who's here? Who's Glenn?
I don't know who Glenn is. Glenn's unhappy. Glenn left. Why does Nick have to take so long eating dinner? Like, imagine actually, like, having, like, dinner, like, doing stuff.
Nah.
Nah.
No time for dinner. Only time for depression.
You mean the Great Depression?
Yes, very funny, Daniel.
Alright, I'm ready.
I'm good.
Should I get some more coffee? No, I think I've had too much coffee. You know what? You can never have too much coffee. You know what? We're fine.
Daniel,
We're good.
no,
We're good.
you don't need more coffee. You need
I
to
don't
drink
need
Never
more.
have too much coffee, dude.
You know what? I don't
Don't
have too
encourage
much
it.
coffee. I have a good amount of coffee. I have chocolate coffee. Sorry, I got distracted. Okay, so we're starting section 4. You guys ready for section 4?
Yes.
Nick Brandt just missed the time, but whatever. Nick Brandt, he's eating
Did he
dinner.
come back yet?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Alright, section 4.
He'll be fine.
The bonus army. Hoover's reaction to a major public protest sealed his legacy. In the summer of 1932, Congress debated a bill authorizing immediate payment of long-promised cash bonuses to veterans of World War I, originally scheduled to be paid out in 1945. Given the economic hardships facing the country, the bonus came to symbolize government relief for the most deserving recipients. And from across the country, more than 15,000 unemployed veterans and their families converged in Washington, D.C. They erected a tent city across the Potomac River in Anacostia Flats, a Hooverville in the spirit of the camps of homeless and unemployed Americans then appearing in American cities. Concerned with what immediate payment would do to the federal budget, Hoover opposed the bill, which was eventually voted down by the Senate. While most of the bonus army left Washington in defeat, many stayed to press their case. Hoover talked the remaining veterans insurrectionists and ordered them to leave. Called the remaining veterans insurrectionists and ordered them to leave. When thousands failed to heed the vacation order, General Douglas MacArthur, accompanied by local police, infantry, cavalry, tanks, and a machine gun squadron, stormed the tent city and routed the bonus army. National media covered the disaster as troops chased down men and women, tear-gassed children, and torched the shantytown. Hoover's insensitivity towards suffering Americans, his unwillingness to address widespread economic problems, and his repeated platitudes about returning prosperity condemned his presidency. Hoover, of course, was not responsible for the Depression, not personally. But neither he nor his advisors conceived of the enormity of the crisis. A crisis his conservative ideology could neither accommodate nor address. As a result, Americans found little relief from Washington. They were on their own. Section 4 complete. Whoa, we're doing so good.
Yeah. That's why we do this so fast.
That is why we do this. It is so fast. We're doing so good.
That looks like a really bad town. Like this photo on the page.
Yeah, the photo's like bad, and also they got like machine gun and tear gas and a whole bunch of other stuff, which is
No, I think this isn't a photo of the tent city. It's just some town that set up and it looks awful.
just some random town.
Yeah. Also, Dan, you're still echoing.
Well, fine. I'll switch to my AirPods.
No, don't. Well, it's fine. Whatever. I don't care.
No, I'm gonna stay echoing until Nick Brandt gets back, and then I'll.
And then he can fix the volume for the stream, unless the stream doesn't care.
There's like 5 people left in the stream, so like I'm not sure how much they care.
Yeah. Okay. You can.
Okay, if you're left in the stream, say
I'm
hi.
one of the 4.
Is it a Hooverville? Wait,
Yeah,
actually, yeah, is it a Hooverville? We have to like show the pictures.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me send a.
It is a Hooverville. Hi. You know what? We got Estrella. That's all we really need. As long as we have Estrella in the
Yeah,
chat.
it's pretty cool. Just
Yeah.
for helping out person.
At least we are helping one person. That's the spirit. Technically, there's 4 people watching.
I'm
5
one
people
of them.
watching.
You're one
Three
of
of them
them.
are us.
Yeah.
So technically, there's 2 people watching.
Yep.
You know what? This is doing better than the Jawcast, so I'm happy with that.
It is.
Oh my gosh.
The Jawcast was an amazing. It was a beautiful idea, but the execution for the Jawcast was just like it wasn't there.
It's unfortunate. Maybe we should have like a job revival.
Should we have the Jaw revival?
I don't even know what it was.
It was Blake's like podcast thing that he made last April. That he had like 5 podcasts, and then he just kind of like gave up on it. Why is Nick Brain taking so long? Okay, whatever. We're starting section 5. You guys ready for section 5?
Okie dokie.
Yeah.
All right. Roman numeral 5. The lived experience of the Great Depression. That's a pretty cool looking photo. It's a Hooverville in Seattle, Washington. Live chat can't see that, but it's fine. In 1934, a woman from Humboldt County, California. Whoa. It's like the first time California is mentioned. Woo. Let's go, California.
Oh my gosh.
I know that place. Okay. In 1934, a woman from Humboldt County, California, wrote to First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, seeking for a job for her husband, a surveyor, who had been out of work for nearly 2 years. The pair had survived on the meager income she received from working at the county courthouse. My salary could keep us going, she explained, but I am to have a baby. The family needed temporary help, and she explained, after that I can go back to work and we can work out our own salvation. But to have this baby come to a home full of worry and despair, with no money for the things it needs, is not fair. It needs and deserves a happy start in life. As the United States slid ever deeper into the Great Depression, such tragic scenes played out time and time again. Individuals, families, and communities faced the painful, frightening, and often bewildering collapse of the economic institutions on which they depended. The more fortunate were spared the worst effects, and a few even profited from it. But by the end of 1932, the crisis had become so deep and so widespread that most Americans had suffered directly. Markets crashed throughout the no fault of their own. Workers were plunged into poverty because of the impersonal forces for which they shared no responsibility. With no safety net, they were thrown into economic chaos. With rampant unemployment and declining wages, Americans slashed expenses. The fortunate could survive by simply deferring vacations and regular consumer purchases. Middle and working class Americans might rely on disappearing credit at neighborhood stores, default on utility bills, or skip meals. Those who could borrow from relatives or took in boarders and homes, or doubled up in tenements. The most desperate, the chronically unemployed, encamped on public or marginal lands in Hoovervilles, spontaneous shanty towns that dotted America's cities, depending on breadlines and street corner peddling. Poor women and young children entered the labor force as they always had. The idea of male breadwinner was always a fiction for poor Americans, but the Depression decimated millions of new workers. The emotional and psychological shocks of unemployment and underemployment only added to the shocking material depravities of the Depression. Social workers and charity officials, for instance, often found the unemployed suffered from feelings of futility, anger, bitterness, confusion, and loss of pride. Such feelings affected the rural poor no less than the urban. They had the perfect opportunity to say that the unemployed were suffering from depression, and they didn't say that. Like, it's the Great Depression. Okay, whatever.
Okay, wait.
Alright, that was section 5.
What's hoppin'?
Nick's back. Nick. Hi, Nick.
Hi.
You made it. Alright, Nick. Oh my gosh, and you put the page to the right place.
Yeah.
Alright, so I have like
Yes,
what do I even have? I have a yogurt, so I'm gonna like eat that yogurt. Nick, could you read section 6 for me?
Oh, that's
Hold on,
terrifying.
hold on.
I'm supposed to read and take notes.
No, you can just copy my notes or whatever.
Yeah, you can just read because both
Or
Josh
go
and
back
Nick are
to my
taking.
notes. Just let me take notes. Hold on. But let me finish taking notes for the other one.
Okay.
Or you don't even have to finish section 6. You can just read section 6 while I'm like engulfing my yogurt, and then like I can go back to reading.
Engulfing.
Also, we have
yogurt.
7 likes on this live stream. Like that's like pretty impressive. I'm not gonna lie.
We have 6.
7.
What? Why is my page less live than yours? Also, who has? Are you have your speakers on, Daniel?
Yeah, I'm switching to like my AirPods. Or I was just waiting for you to get back so I could like.
Okay.
Does it
yeah,
say I'm
Daniel,
streaming on
thanks for your
Discord? Oh, it
effort.
doesn't. That'd be cool.
What?
Look at look at my note in Discord.
Alright, yeah, I'm gonna switch to AirPods in a moment, but you can like just start reading right now.
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
ready.
you guys ready? Okay. I was gonna like.
Go, Nick.
Never mind. Anyway. Actually, I'll go to Josh's notes because I'm not taking notes then. On the Great Plains, environmental catastrophe deepened America's long-standing agricultural crisis. Actually,
Hold on. Yeah, you're just echoing like terrible.
this is so bad. Daniel.
Fix it now? Okay, sorry.
Is this better? Nope.
No.
Okay.
Oh, God. Is anyone still here?
Yeah.
Is this better?
Yay.
No, all I need to turn you up, but it's so much better.
Alright.
Daniel,
Okay, I'm gonna start that over, I guess.
My AirPods are cool.
We
are.
This is
Yeah.
why any headphones are cool, Daniel. Okay. On the Great Plains, environmental catastrophe deepened America's long-standing agricultural crisis and magnified the tragedy of the Depression. Beginning in
Nick, you're echoing
1932.
now.
Who is it? Is it Nick?
Nick Lee is echoing now.
Nick!
So it wasn't even my fault. What?
It
No,
was
it was
you
before.
originally.
Daniel was before, but now Nick.
Why does everybody use speakers in Discord? This is horrid.
No idea. It's
Because
so
my
bad.
voice sounds, my headphones isolate sound too much. It makes me sound weird.
I believe in you. It's fine. You'll get used to it if you use them.
Now I sound weird.
It's fine.
You literally sound fine.
No, he sounds weird to himself because they're noise canceling. Anyway,
Oh, yeah, okay.
do I have to reread the first sentence?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Great, don't worry.
Beginning in 1932, severe droughts hit from Texas to the Dakotas and lasted until at least 1936. The droughts compounded years of agricultural mismanagement. To grow their crops, plains farmers had plowed up natural ground cover that had taken ages to form over the surface of the dry plains states. Relatively wet decades had protected them, but during the early 1930s, without rain, the exposed fertile topsoil turned to dust, and without sod or windbreaks such as trees, rolling winds churned the dust into massive storms that blotted out the sky, choked settlers and livestock, and rained dirt not only across the region, but as far east as Washington, D.C., New England, and ships on the Atlantic Ocean. Jesus. The Dust Bowl, as the region became known, exposed all too late the need for conservation.
Can you slow down a little bit?
Yeah. The region's farmers, already hit by years of foreclosures and declining commodity prices, were decimated. For many in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Arkansas, Arkansas,
You say Arkansas?
Arkansas,
Arkansas.
who were baked out, blown out, and broke, their only hope was to travel west to California, whose rains still brought bountiful harvests and, potentially, jobs for farm workers. It was an exodus. Oklahoma lost 440,000 people, or a full 18.4% of its 1930 population, to outmigration. Look at this lovely photo that we already saw.
That's a popular photo.
Sure is. Josh? APUSH? Done typing? Nope. Oh, wait, I should have Nick's notes too. Nick, can you send your notes?
Oh yeah, sure.
Oh my god. Time to compare notes.
Time to compare notes. Whoa. And
Dang.
then there's me not taking any notes because I don't take notes.
Daniel.
Oh, wait, actually, I can
I
have them as
don't need them.
two separate ones. You don't at all,
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Let's see, if I put this, like, there, then I could...
Do you have multiple ones up now? Oh gosh.
Actually, I'm not going to do that, it doesn't matter. I'll just, switch between the two to check your progress. This sounds great. Alright, you guys ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Wait, what the hell? Oh my goodness, it's so laggy, my computer cannot handle this much streaming. Okay.
Oh, do I need to do the streaming?
No, it's fine.
Or do you need to stream on your server?
Oh, can I... Dude, I could...
Yes,
no,
you
I couldn't,
can do
I couldn't
that,
stream
'cause
all
you
of
can-
my monitors.
Yes, true.
Anyway,
You
Dorothea...
should get a dock so you can switch. Sorry.
Oh, that'd be interesting, yeah. I don't know. Dorothea Lange's migrant mother became one of the most enduring images of the Dust Bowl and the ensuing westward exodus. Lange, a photographer for the Farm Security Administration, captured the image at a migrant farm worker camp in Nipomo, California in 1936. In the photograph, a young mother stares out with a worried, weary expression. She was a migrant, having left her home in Oklahoma to follow the crops to the Golden State. She took part in what many in the mid-1930s were beginning to realize as a vast migration of families out of the southwestern plains states. In the image, she cradles an infant and supports two older children who cling to her. Lange's photo encapsulated the nation's struggle. The subject of the photograph seemed used to hard work, but down on her luck and uncertain about what future might hold. The Okies, as such Western migrants were disparagingly called by their new neighbors, were the most visible group who were on the move during the Depression, lured by news of rumors of jobs in far-flung regions of the country. By 1932, sociologists were estimating that millions of men were on the roads and rails, traveling the country. Economists sought to quantify the movement of families from the plains. Popular magazines and newspapers were filled with stories of homeless boys, and the veterans-turned-migrants of the Bonus Army commandeering boxcars. Popular culture, such as William Wellman's 1933 film, Wild Boys of the Road, and most famously, John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, woo! Published in 1939 and turned into a hit movie a year later, captured the Depression's dislocated populations. Y'all wanna watch that movie?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah,
be
we
great.
can watch it. Let's watch it.
Dude, I'll write it on my whiteboard.
We
Grapes.
can watch that and I can study for physics at the same time. It'd be
Grapes.
fun.
Yeah, that sounds cool. I could like watch that and study for an AP environmental science test that I have to do.
I cannot
should
watch
do that later
movies
tonight.
while studying, are you
Actually,
kidding me?
Yeah, that sounds
Yeah.
like a bad idea.
I always do that.
I'm just gonna like look up from where I'm studying and then watch the movie for half an hour and be like, oh whoops.
Well, actually, like we'll figure that out after the live. Like actually, like I might actually want to watch that.
That'd be fun.
Yeah. Okay. These years witnessed the first significant reversal in the flow of people between rural and urban areas. Thousands of city dwellers fled the jobless cities and moved to the country looking for work. As relief efforts floundered, many state and local officials threw up barriers to migration, making it difficult for newcomers to receive relief or find work. Some state legislatures made it a crime to bring poor migrants into the state and allowed local officials to deport migrants to neighboring states. In the winter of 1935 to 1936, California, Florida, and Colorado established border blockades to block poor migrants from their states and reduce competition with local residents for jobs. A billboard outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, informed potential migrants that there were no jobs in California and warned them to keep out.
I love like the emphasis on like the keep.
Yeah, keep out.
Yeah. Keep out.
Ugh. And we
Keep
got
out.
Damn, that's a...
No, the out isn't emphasized, so it's just keep out.
Yeah. During her assignment as a photographer for the Works Progress Administration, Dorothea Lange documented the movement of migrant families forced from their homes by drought and economic depression. This family, captured by Lange in 1938, was in the process of traveling 124 miles by foot across Oklahoma.
Slow down.
This is just it's just a photo caption.
Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
it's a photo.
Because the father was
Yeah,
ill
Nick's
and
actually
therefore
reading
unable to
a photo
receive
caption, not like
relief
me.
for or WAPA work. Yeah, the captions are like useful, but not like super useful. So there's that. Alright. Sympathy for migrants, however, accelerated late in the Depression with the publication of John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. The Joad family's struggles drew attention to the plight of Depression-era migrants and, just a month after the nationwide release of the film version, Congress created the Select Committee to investigate the interstate migration of destitute citizens. Might take you a second to write all that down.
Copy and paste.
Wait, is there an acronym for it? Is it just like?
I guess you could say IMDC.
But it's not like official, because usually like, it gives you like an official like acronym or whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't say an official acronym, so.
This is a crazy long name.
Yeah, I'm like watching you type it out. We're only halfway through the paragraph. Okay.
Yasha joined.
Yasha? Yo, it's Yasha. He is DC. Okay. Starting in 1940, the committee held widely publicized hearings. But it was too late. Within a year of its founding, defense industries were already gearing up in the wake of the outbreak of World War II, and the quote-unquote problem of migration suddenly became a lack of migrants needed to fill war industries. Such relief was nowhere to be found in the 1930s. Whoa, look, it adds to the Depression.
Wow.
Oh wow.
Yay. Okay.
Yeehaw.
Hold on.
Alright.
I just hear Josh's keyboard furiously typing away.
That's next.
That is Nick, yeah.
Oh, do you want me to use my louder keyboard?
No.
I saw that when I was in your house this week, and it's such a like, good looking keyboard.
It sounds so much nicer, but it's
It
loud.
does.
Oh my gosh,
Super satisfying.
I can't think
Nick,
straight.
Nick. Oh wait, that's why you have two keyboards? It's because your friends complain? I love that so much.
With the start of
Yeah.
Notes 2. 1 second, I'm making another window for notes. Chapter 23, The Great Depression. Yay. I think that's the one I want. Yeah, okay.
We're almost halfway good. We're over halfway through.
We are over halfway through. We're
wow,
doing
this is
so
so
good.
fast.
I know, that's why I say, like, reading in the group actually makes it go by way faster.
I am.
And it's like actually fun compared to like if we were reading
Exactly.
this
This is
would
why,
not
like,
be
this
fun.
is why we gotta like do this more. Like, it's actually like it's fun. We do it quickly, and we still get the exact same notes and everything.
Yeah.
Plus, we have like Estrella and like Yasha and some random other people getting stuff out of this.
We sure do. Okay, you all ready?
Yasha's not even an APUSH. I don't know what he's doing.
Yeah, Yasha's just a history nerd.
Yeah, I guess so. Y'all ready?
Wait, was the 1932 election the one with Hoover versus Al? Whatever.
I think
his
it was
Al's
No, that was in
28.
1928. The 1932
That was
one
28.
was with Hoover versus Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Delano. Okay. And did we talk about Mexican immigrants yet? I don't think we did.
Not yet.
Thank you, Nueven. And 1 second, I'm making the notes.
Did we
look
talk
nice.
about the Agricultural Adjustment Act?
Nope.
Cool. Alright, I think I am ready. Yeah, ready.
Cool. And my notes are... Yay, the layout looks nicer now. Okay. Americans, meanwhile, feared foreign workers willing to work for even lower wages. The Saturday Evening Post warned that foreign immigrants who were, quote-unquote, compelled to accept employment on any terms and conditions offered would exacerbate the economic crisis. On September 8th, 1930, the Hoover administration issued a press release on the administration of immigration laws under existing conditions of unemployment. Hoover instructed consular officers to scrutinize carefully the visa applications of those likely to become public charges, and suggested that this might include denying visas to most, if not all, alien laborers and artisans. The crisis itself had stifled foreign immigration, but
That's not
such
very cash money.
but such restrictive and exclusionary actions in the first years of the Depression intensified its effects. The number of European visas... Wait, yeah, okay.
How?
How what?
Because how did it extensify the effects by not allowing people to come in?
The crisis has stifled the foreign... Such restrictive and exclusionary... because people weren't working, and not allowing immigrants to work made more issues.
No, but then with the Depression there weren't enough jobs for people. So why do we want to let people? Why did not letting more people in
Actually, that's a good question. Wait, how did that? How did like?
Wait,
not
isn't
letting
this
people
whole thing
admit it?
saying, like... The previous part was saying that a lack of migrants was needed to fill war industry. Yeah, it's because World War II started, and so suddenly there was a need
okay,
for
so
jobs.
this is like kind of at the end. Okay.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
also it says European visas fell and deportations increased. So many people were deported. Then World War II hit, and also there was no like European money or immigrants or tourism happening or anything like that. Even though that's not a significant source of income, it's something, I guess.
Well, not for us. It is for other countries. Okay, that makes sense because World War II hit, and then we needed. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Okay. Between 1930 and 1932, 54,000 people were deported. An additional 44,000 deportable aliens left, quote-unquote, voluntarily. Damn. 100,000
Voluntarily.
people. Oh, that almost exactly goes to 100,000, but it's really 98, and that bothers me.
What goes to 100,000?
54,000 were deported, and an additional 44,000 deportable left voluntarily, which is 54 plus 44, so 98. Alright. Ready?
Not
Nick
quite.
might not be.
When? What time period? Not between.
30 and 32.
Alright, cool. Ready.
Dankin. Exclusionary measures hit Mexican immigrants particularly hard. Here we are.
No, that's
This-
the Mexican immigrant part.
Yeah.
Woo.
Woo. The State Department made a concerted effort to reduce immigration from Mexico as early as 1929, and Hoover's executive actions arrived the following year. Officials in the Southwest led a coordinated effort to push out Mexican immigrants. In Los Angeles, the city's Committee on Coordination of Unemployment Relief began working closely with federal officials in early 1931 to conduct deportation raids, while the LA County Department of Charities began a simultaneous drive to repatriate Mexicans and Mexican Americans on relief. Oh my god, this sentence. Negotiating a charity rate with the railroads to return Mexicans, quote-unquote, voluntarily, to their mother country. You're just copying it, nice.
It's too much.
Yeah. Josh, are you gonna write a thing on that?
I'm gonna do what Nick did.
Okay. According to the federal census from 1930 to 40, the Mexican-born population living in Arizona, California, New Mexico, and Texas fell from 616,998 to 377,433. Jeez, it's like
cut in
half. Yeah.
I don't know why they didn't say that.
Absolutely obliterated.
I mean, it wasn't
Why
quite,
didn't
but
they
like,
just
oh
say
my
cut
goodness.
in half?
It wasn't
it's close.
quite, but
okay,
yeah.
it's definitely not half, but yeah, whatever. It's okay.
Franklin Roosevelt did not indulge anti-immigrant sentiment as willingly as Hoover had. Under the New Deal, the Immigration and Naturalization Service halted some of the Hoover administration's most divisive practices. But with jobs suddenly scarce, hostile attitudes intensified, and official policies less than welcoming, immigration plummeted and deportations rose. Over the course of the Depression, more people left the United States than entered it. Oof.
That was like one of the biggest sections. The next one's the biggest, but that was like the second biggest. So good job, guys.
Woo. Oh, is the live stream like good quality? Because I thought I changed it, but it also.
Yeah, it's good. Like I can see everything. Like I'm looking at the live stream right now. That's just like.
Okay, good.
Nick, do you want to read the next section or should I read it?
I'm good either way.
All right. Well, I'm still like eating random stuff, so I'll let you
Oh, okay.
keep reading. I'll let you know as soon as I'm done eating, and then I'll go back to reading.
Okay. Y'all
You're
ready?
so good, Nick. Go, Nick.
Yeah.
Woo! Alright. Section 7. Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the First New Deal.
That's the best voice for that.
Oh wait, we've got this beautiful... Should I read the image caption first? Actually, no, I'll read it after like the first
Yes.
paragraph. Okay. The early years of the Depression were catastrophic. The crisis, far from relenting, deepened each year. Unemployment peaked at 25% in 1932. With no end in sight, and with private firms crippled and charities overwhelmed by the crisis, Americans looked to their government as the last barrier against starvation, hopelessness, and perpetual poverty. Now do I read the thing? Nope, I'm gonna do the other thing first. Okay. Few presidential elections in modern American history... Oh wait, you go, Nick. people look to the
What?
government.
Am I
now.
reading?
Dank. Okay.
No, you're
Few
typing.
presidential elections in modern American history have been more consequential than that of 1932. The United States was struggling through the third year of the Depression, and exasperated voters overthrew Hoover in a landslide to elect the Democratic governor of New York, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Roosevelt came from a privileged background in New York's Hudson River Valley. His distant cousin, Theodore Roosevelt, became president while Franklin was at Harvard.
Harvard, yeah, what's the Harvard? What happened to that?
Franklin Roosevelt embarked on a slow but steady ascent through state and national politics. In 1913, he was appointed Assistant Secretary of the Navy, a position he held during the defense emergency of World War I. In the course of his rise, in the summer of 1921, Roosevelt suffered a sudden bout of lower body pain and paralysis. Why does this happen to, like, every president?
Because all
you
the
got, like,
presidents are
polio.
fat old men.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, bad joke.
Well, I mean, that's another reason, Josh.
True. Not necessarily wrong.
No, I think he got like polio or something. Wait, did FDR? Okay, this is a pen. This is for science. FDR polio.
For science, Daniel. How about history?
Alright, he was diagnosed with polio. The disease had left him a paraplegic, but, encouraged and assisted by his wife, Eleanor, Roosevelt sought therapeutic treatment and maintained sufficient political connections to re-enter politics.
Therapeutic treatment.
Damn, he actually... Whoa, that's actually really cool. In 1928, Roosevelt won election as governor of New York. He oversaw the rise of the Depression and drew from progressivism to address the economic crisis. During his gubernatorial tenure, Roosevelt introduced the first comprehensive unemployment relief program and helped pioneer efforts to expand public utilities. He also relied on like-minded advisors. For example, Francis Perkins, then commissioner of the state's labor department, successfully
I'm getting a
advocated...
call. Hold on.
You're taking a call during a live stream?
Oh my goodness, you're
So unprofessional.
you're a disgrace to our 6 concurrent viewers.
Yeah, actually, while he does that, I'm gonna...
What is
go to
Yasha
real quick.
saying? The CIA tried to use LSD for mind control?
You know, the chat's just going off.
It sure is. Wait, Estrella, are you actually, like, listening and taking
Oh,
notes
right.
too? Because that's really cool
I
if
think
you are.
I think Estrella actually might be. Wait, Estrella, are you?
That's like...
That's what we're going for, right?
That's
I
what
mean,
we're
yeah,
hoping for.
honestly, if we
Probably
can
like
get this to be a
50.
thing where we're getting, like, 60 people, like, listening to our live stream and taking notes.
I honestly think we could, because like,
Yeah,
some people
it's been-
don't want to like read it.
It's been really helpful for us. Like, if you can,
Yeah. Well,
if you
'cause,
can type and keep up, it's an amazing,
Yeah,
amazing thing. You
and
get,
I can-
like, all the
Yeah.
notes done really fast.
Exactly.
can read
And
even
it's
slower
been
if we
just under
want.
an hour right now, and we're already almost done with this chapter. We're not almost done. We're like 2/3 of the way done, and like this is like the longest chapter of the book. So like for shorter chapters, where it's even like better.
Yeah.
And it's like fun.
Yeah.
Estrella's taking notes.
Back.
Yay!
Well, she said, am I what? That doesn't really mean she's taking
No,
notes.
she said, "Oh yeah."
Oh, she did? Why is my live chat so bad?
Why is my live chat like?
Because
more
your
live than
internet
live
is just, like, dying, because Discord and...
Josh,
streaming.
that's so incredibly not true.
I know, it's so great, though.
Maybe my computer is not having the most fun. Anyway.
Actually, yeah, look at your stats of your computer right now.
Oh yeah, okay. Activity monitor. Also, I'm going to talk about Francis Perkins while it opens. Francis Perkins, the then commissioner of the state's labor department, successfully advocated pioneering legislation that enhanced workplace safety and reduced the use of child labor in factories. Yay! Perkins later accompanied Roosevelt to Washington and served as the nation's first female Secretary of Labor. Yay. Memory...
Yay.
My memory's fine.
Wait, is she a key person? Is she an important person?
I don't know, but
No,
I'd
that's
write
not.
about her maybe. OBS is taking 150% of CPU, so
Josh probably just like mentioned.
Wow,
I
that's
know,
incredible.
that's-
Out of 400, Nick?
out of 400,
That's
yeah.
out of 400, yeah.
Is it all Apple out of 400? Do they all have?
It depends. Each core or each thread is 100%. So
Okay.
How much is Chrome taking for reference?
Chrome is taking 6.2.
16%?
Oh wait, that's about like actually there's like a ton of renderers and stuff, so I'd say about 30 in total.
You guys are getting computer nerdy. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Sorry, Daniel. Okay, I'm gonna read the caption to the image and stuff. We got what even is this thing? employment as of November 1st, 1936 is 5,000. This is
Whoa, there's
so
so many
whack.
people in arts.
Each figure represents 100 project workers. This is interesting. Federal Art Project. Posters like this 1936 production showing the extent of the Federal Art Project were used to prove the value of the WPA, and by extension, the entire New Deal, to the American people.
Well, that's pretty neat.
How did the federal art project help the economy? Just because people had
It-
jobs?
Yeah, it
working
gave
on
people jobs, and it increased the arts at the same time, so that's kind of cool.
That is
Yeah.
great idea.
Woohoo!
Good job, government. Okay, on July 1st, 1932, Roosevelt, the newly designated presidential nominee of the Democratic Party, delivered the first and one of the most famous on-site acceptance speeches in American presidential history. Building to a conclusion, he promised, "I pledge you, I pledge myself, to a new deal for the American people." Newspaper editors seized on the phrase New Deal, and it entered the American political lexicon as shorthand for Roosevelt's program to address the Great Depression. There were, however, few hints in his political campaign that suggested the size and scope of the New Deal. Regardless, Roosevelt crushed Hoover.
Roosevelt?
Is it Roosevelt? Yeah,
I think it's Roosevelt.
it's totally Roosevelt. I've just been
It
saying
is.
Roosevelt.
I don't think it's Roosevelt. That's not Roosevelt.
Roosevelt.
No, that's
Roosevelt.
false.
Some
Roosevelt.
people say Roosevelt.
That's what I've been saying. That's almost what I've been
Yeah.
saying. He won more counties than any previous candidate in American history. He spent the months between his election and inauguration traveling, planning, and assembling a team of advisors, the famous brain trust of academics and experts, to help formulate a plan of attack.
Eleanor Roosevelt. What the heck?
Dude, he's got a brain trust. On March
I
4th,
don't even know what that means.
1930, it's his team of people to help him formulate a plan of attack.
Whoa.
Yeah.
On March 4th, 1933, in his first inaugural address, Roosevelt, yes, famously declared, "This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive, and will prosper." So, first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Oh, it's that quote.
That's a famous quote right there. Bing,
Yeah.
bing, 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 bing. Famous quote.
Wait,
famous
I
quote.
need
Famous
that.
quote.
Yeah.
Famous quote.
Where is it?
It's at the end of the paragraph. That starts with on July 1st.
Why does he have so many quotes?
Cause he's a cool
'Cause he's
dude,
a
my dude.
president and he
Cool
talks.
dude.
He's such a cool dude. Oh, Nick, I was
One
not
president
scrolling down on
doesn't
your
Yeah.
notes.
have that many quotes.
Anyway,
New Deal. I'll probably put that under the.
what's going on in the chat with people?
Yeah, Stray's gonna share it to AP Lang chat, and I'm really hyped about that.
Dude, that's poppin'. Okay, I mean, people are kind of late. It'd be more fun. We should announce like a starting time and then like have a pre-chat
We should
or
make this,
pre-stream
like- we should make this,
discussion
like,
for like a
official.
half an hour or whatever.
Okay, we have to discuss the logistics about this once we're done with this live. But right now we gotta like keep working.
Yeah,
on it.
because
Like,
that's gonna be so cool.
I see good potential with this. Like this is something good.
Dude, we could probably have Miss Ambrose getting in here and like providing comments on the chapter
Oh
as we
my
go
God.
on.
Yes.
Oh
my goodness.
That'd be so good.
Oh, we should have posted it. We should have posted it to the Google
Yeah, we
Classroom.
should
Dude,
post it to the Google
Okay,
Classroom.
let's formulate a plan once we're done with this and like get it together and then
Okay.
post it in classroom and stuff.
Wait, this is
Yeah.
actually like this was like we could definitely get like Miss Ambrose and like possibly Carpenter to join in. Cause like remember like Hoff did like the live streams for Honors Camp.
Yeah, like Puff's live stream.
Yeah,
It'd be so
Only
good.
student-
but like. Yeah, but it'd be student run, just like Miss
Oh.
Ambrose popping in for like a. That's actually this is like a really good idea.
Oh, dude, Estrella,
we
we
could
could totally do that too. A discussion
We can
afterwards.
have like a discussion, like a voice chat. Yeah, discussion with Miss Ambrose and stuff afterward.
Okay,
Other schools.
And
I'm gonna
and like
start writing ideas.
yes.
Let's
Yes,
see, Google
very good.
Classroom /
This is going good. I'm feeling
IG,
the brain powers in this room tonight.
chat.
Like the brain juices are flowing.
We could get other schools to do it. That seems a bit excessive, but sure, maybe.
No, like Elmo. Like hypothetically, like Elmo's kids can just like sit in.
If we're gonna
anybody
do this,
can
we're
watch
all gonna need better mics.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
fine
I
with
know
buying a
you're
new
not.
mic.
This
I
is
don't
fine.
care. If I'm gonna be
need a
doing reading a
microphone
lot.
anyway for
I think
stuff.
like some of I think
I'm fine with my AirPods.
no, Daniel, you.
Yasha, are you in APUSH?
No. I don't think so.
I think he is. Why wouldn't he be? He's a junior.
Oh yeah, he is. I always forget that.
Oh my gosh.
He's a junior in calc. Ugh.
Okay, Ambrose / carp. Okay, I'm just writing down ideas so we don't forget them. Anyway, I'm gonna finish Roosevelt's quote. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. What did I... Oh, okay. Roosevelt's reassuring words would have rung hollow if he had not taken swift action against the economic crisis. In his first days in office, Roosevelt and his advisors prepared, submitted, and secured congressional enactment of numerous laws designed to arrest the worst of the Great Depression. His administration threw the federal government headlong into the fight against the Depression.
Although I don't know how much I want Miss Ambrose looking over my shoulder reading my notes.
Okay, maybe we'll talk with her afterwards.
Yeah, be like, hey, you can show up at like 7:30 when we're done reading the chapter.
Oh, Estrella just sent the thing to Lang.
Let's go.
Let's go! Everybody's gonna find my old YouTube channel, it's funny.
Like, everybody's gonna.
Butter Creeper Man!
Like, oh my
Let's
God,
go.
Butter Creeper Man.
Watch next YouTube videos.
Fine.
Should I just like always stream to Butter Creeper Man and not even care about my other account?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
You already have like
Where's the-
22 subscribers.
Yeah.
I'm subscribed. Everyone subscribe to Butter Creeper Man.
Oh yeah, I
know
did
what?
subscribe, right?
I'm gonna make this
I'm
stream
subscribed to
public
Butter
then.
Creeper Man.
Let's
Dude,
make it
everybody
public.
subscribe to Butter Creeper Man. We're doing great. Also, I just choked on some gum, but we're all good. And I
And go watch more videos of Baby Nick.
They're so fun.
Yeah, there's Baby Nick videos.
Oh, can I not change the... Okay, whatever, I can't make the thing right now, but whatever. Anyway. Did I already say that thing? The Roosevelt's reassuring words? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. Roosevelt immediately looked to stabilize the collapsing banking system. He declared a national bank holiday, closing American banks, and set to work publishing the Emergency Banking Act swiftly through Congress.
Oh, you have both of our notes? I didn't even realize.
Yeah, I'm watching both
Yeah,
of
they
you
both
so I
are.
can see
That's
when you're
really
done
cool.
typing. Okay, cool. On March
Alright, I'll be
12th...
back in a second. I'm the bottle.
Okay,
Fill up my water bottle, and I'll be ready to read.
sick. On March 12th, the night before select banks reopened under stricter federal guidelines, Roosevelt appeared on the radio in the first of his fireside chats. Might want to write about those.
Why are those important?
It's
Yeah.
capitalized, so it's gotta be. Dude, fireside chats, it's like us over here chatting it up.
No, that's like one of the things he's famous for, is going on the radio. Sort of like Churchill, going on the radio and just talking about stuff.
Huh, that's cool.
I wish that was still a thing. The president's podcast or something.
It's called
Yes.
Twitter.
Oh my
It's just
god.
great.
I'm ready to
No,
read.
but Twitter's a cesspool.
Yo,
like
again,
something nice.
exactly.
Something I want Donald Trump to talk me to sleep. No, I don't.
Oh no, I don't. No.
No, go back. No.
Okay, the addresses which the
Let's
president...
back to reading.
Yeah, the addresses which the president continued delivering through 4 terms... Wait, 4?
He got,
Damn.
Oh yeah, he did get 4 terms.
That's
yeah.
crazy. 16 years in office? Jeez. Okay, were informal,
Yeah, he's like the
even
only one that did it.
personal.
He was just like, he's wacky.
Yeah. Roosevelt used his airtime to explain New Deal legislation, to encourage confidence in government action, and to mobilize the American people's support. Dude, this dude's a G.
This dude is. You guys, Roosevelt was a G.
Roosevelt was a G.
Let's go. Alright. In the first chat, Roosevelt described the new banking safeguards and asked the public to place their trust and their savings in banks. Americans responded, and across the country, deposits outpaced withdrawals. The act was a major success. In June, Congress passed the Glass-Steagall Banking Act, which instituted federal deposit insurance and barred the mixing of commercial and investment banking. Wait, isn't that like the same thing?
Wait.
No,
hold
it's
on,
definitely
what?
not.
What's the difference between commercial
Well,
and
first
investment?
Commercial is like businesses, and investment banking is like when you're making an investment in other companies.
Oh, okay.
There's not a big difference, but there's.
Yeah,
All right.
after
where
FDR
are
they
you?
made it illegal. They made it following him,
Nick-
that's funny.
When you read, everybody gets distracted. You gotta take control of that reading power.
What? No, I'm waiting for people to take notes. I'm just
Ready for
good
the
pacing.
titles.
Chillax.
It's great because you can actually see it and we don't even have to tell them.
Yeah.
I know, like I can just I can look and I can be like, oh hey, they're taking this right now.
Why is Stiegel so hard to type?
That is quite a name. Stupid seagull.
I'm just copying the text exactly.
I
Just copy.
I copied a big part of it.
Stop mixing of commercial and investment. I'm not sure what that means, but go. Yeah, go ahead.
Wait, Josh can explain it to you. I was confused too.
Oh, you need the explanation again.
Commercial is just
I
like
think it-
in relation to commercial stuff, buying things.
yeah, companies'
Yes,
savings
businesses-
versus people's
it's like
investments and
businesses and
stocks.
Yeah.
Not okay. Yeah.
All right,
there's a big
cool.
difference. But it's investment is stocks.
Yes.
So, there's
Whack. Okay.
I copied the right part. Hold on.
Oh, first
yeah,
100
I guess.
days. That's another thing. Another key term.
Bro. Okay. Stabilizing the banks was
Bro.
only a first step. In the remainder of his first 100 days, Roosevelt and his congressional allies focused especially on relief for suffering Americans. Congress debated, amended, and passed what Roosevelt proposed. As one historian noted, the president directed the entire operation like a seasoned field general. And
Wow.
despite some questions over the constitutionality of many of his actions, Americans and their congressional representatives conceded that the crisis demanded swift and immediate action. The Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, employed young
CCC.
men on conservation and reforestation projects. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration, FERA, provided direct cash assistance to state relief agencies struggling to care for the unemployed. The Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, built a series of hydroelectric dams along the Tennessee River as part of a comprehensive program to economically develop a chronically depressed region. And several agencies helped home and farm owners refinance their mortgages. And Roosevelt wasn't done.
Oh
You
my
know, this
God.
textbook has sass. This whoever
Dude.
wrote this textbook, man, they know what they're doing. They're
Yeah,
playing
dude.
with our emotions.
Roosevelt was not joking around.
Roosevelt was a G.
Serious,
We have
yeah.
that out in the chat.
Can we like make that the title notes?
Can we make
Roosevelt
that
wasn't
title
done.
notes? Roosevelt was a G. No, no, I thought we were going Roosevelt was a G, but we could change it to Roosevelt wasn't done. Also.
Was it what?
I mean-
wasn't done. That's just like the one like.
No.
I mean, the title of the video is still going to be A Push with the
Roosevelt
Boys
wasn't
for the first one, but... yeah.
Hey, push with the boy.
A Push with the Boys. Okay. The heart of Roosevelt's early recovery program consisted of two massive efforts to stabilize and coordinate the American economy. The Agricultural Adjustment Administration, AAA, wait no, AAA, and the National
AAA.
Recovery Administration, NRA. Hey, they still exist.
Wait, what? Wait, no, that's a different thing.
It is? Whack.
That's like the National like Rifle Association.
Oh, yeah, it
or
is.
something.
Yeah.
Like the national,
Yeah, that's definitely a different thing.
That's
So
funny.
there's two different NRAs. There's the Recovery NRA and there's the Boom Boom NRA.
Boom,
Boom,
boom.
boom, bang, bang.
I love it, Daniel.
Boom Boom Bang Bang.
Ooh. Alright.
Woo.
The AAA, created in May 1933, aimed to raise the prices of agricultural commodities, and hence farmers' income, by offering cash incentives to voluntarily limit farm production, decreasing supply, thereby raising prices. The National Industry Recovery Act, NIRA, which created the NRA in June 1933, suspended antitrust
Sure did.
laws to allow businesses to establish codes that would coordinate prices, regulate production levels, and establish conditions of employment to curtail cutthroat competition. In ex-
Whoa, wait, hold on a minute. Can we get an explanation
Wait,
for that
what?
one?
So
Yeah,
we
it
have the
created-
National
what?
Industry Recovery
Suspended
Act,
Antitrust laws.
which made a thing,
There's the National Recovery Administration, which is the NRA, and then there's the National Industrial Recovery Act,
which made the NRA. Yeah, the NIRA made the NRA.
The NIRA made the NRA.
Woo.
So it suspended antitrust laws so that it So that's allowing monopolies?
Wait, yeah. Do you guys remember what antitrust laws were? So antitrust laws were like the laws that were like, hey, if your business is too big and you're like becoming ultra powerful, then we as a government have the right to like absolutely destroy your business and like make it into smaller, many cool businesses.
Huh.
And now they're like, nope, we ain't doing that no more. So they got rid of that.
Monopolies again.
Monopoly. That's a fun game. I like playing Monopoly. I usually like rage quit halfway through it. But that's
Yeah, that's why I don't like that game.
You know, I think the rage
played with
quitting
my
part
siblings.
of Monopoly is like that's the reason why you play Monopoly, just to rage quit over
I've played
Monopoly.
with my siblings so much, and it's just like, ugh, not fun.
Josh, I could probably play Monopoly with your brother. Like I think we have like the same like mentality for that. Like
How the hell do you spell leave? That?
That's not it, no. What is it?
How do you do it?
What? Wait, now I'm confused.
Leave.
I think it's like 2 L's?
I'm
Leave.
confused. I'm dad.
Yeah, it's 2 L's.
Oh,
See, I think people
Oh.
will appreciate my dad jokes.
oh
Wait.
it's just an E.
It's just me.
Whoa.
Nick, I can start reading starting
no.
next section.
No, I'll-
once you
yeah,
finish
okay.
the paragraph.
How do you spell leave?
It's alright, we're taking a
Oh,
break so Nick
alleviate
can...
isn't a word. That's a drug.
Why are you
Alleviate.
struggling?
Oh yeah, that's what you were
Alleviate,
looking for?
not
That's
alleviate.
funny.
Alleviate competition. No, alleviate. I don't know.
Alright, in exchange for these exemptions, businesses agreed to provide reasonable wages and hours, and child labor, and allow workers the right to unionize. Yay!
Yeah.
Participating businesses earned the right to display a placard with the NRA's Blue Eagle, showing their cooperation in the effort to combat the Great Depression. Yippee!
Yippee. Wait, are we on to the next section?
Not yet.
No.
One more.
Not yet.
One more paragraph.
One more paragraph. Boop boop.
Alright. And Nick is pretty much done. The programs of the first 100 days stabilized the American economy and ushered in a robust, though imperfect, recovery. GDP climbed once more, but even as output increased, unemployment remained stubbornly high. Though the unemployment rate dipped from its high in 1933, when Roosevelt was inaugurated, vast numbers remained out of work. If the economy could not put people back to work, the New Deal would try. The Civil Works Administration, CWA, and later the Works Progress Administration, WPA, put unemployed men and women to work on projects designed and proposed by local governments. The Public Works Administration, PWA, provided grants in aid to local governments for large infrastructure projects, such as bridges, tunnels, schoolhouses, libraries, and America's first federal public housing projects. Together, they provided not only tangible projects of immense public good, but employment for millions. The New Deal was reshaping much of the nation.
All right, I'm ready to read now, Nick. I my voice is well rested, and I feel ready.
That's pretty cool. Am I supposed to take notes now?
Okie
No,
dokie.
Nick, you can just chillax. Like that's what I was doing. I was just like,
But I want to
chillax and, like,
chillax. Okay. Oh, wait, no.
just.
There's so many more
This is a
sections.
massive amount of this is the most text blocky notes I think I've ever taken.
And this is
Well, I
the
mean,
most
this is
notes
like-
I've probably taken so far. I had
This is like a
5
really
pages at this
chunky
point.
chapter. This is
Yeah,
like,
Josh.
this is a deep chapter. All right, wait. Nick's notes got replaced with the other Nick's notes.
You can remove my notes and I don't care. My notes.
No, Josh's notes are good. All right,
Okay,
y'all ready?
fine. We'll remove Josh's
No, wait,
notes since he
no.
requested that. Fine, be that
Dude,
way.
someone sent me those notes straight at once.
You want all of the notes? Okay, so watching us take notes isn't technically cheating, but sending you the notes maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm fine
Watching
with
us
it.
take notes is not cheating, but
Actually, I mean, just reading your notes is fine. It's not like they're gonna use them for a test or anything.
Well, yeah, but we're not going to
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, you could transcribe all our notes if you wanted to rewatch the video and do that.
Yeah,
But,
Astray, I think all
your own
three of us, or at least I know I do, have notes on the entire textbook so far, and just like all the condensed information.
I have most of it, yeah.
I have none of them,
not
and
the
I
entire
still managed to
thing,
keep
but-
like an A+ in the class. I just don't take notes.
Here's
Ooh,
my
ooh.
notes folder if you're curious. It's like, I
Are we
missed
getting
like a couple
drunk?
chapters,
Are
and
we
like,
doing this?
when there were fires,
we're
it was
just
pretty
we're
bad, but...
flexing our notes. In the
Look
chat
at my
now.
notes, that's right, flexing those notes. Okay.
Yeah, you wish your notes looked as cool as my notes did.
Yeah.
That was terrible. All right, y'all ready?
Yeah.
Section 8: The New Deal in the South. The impact of initial New Deal legislation was readily apparent in the South, a region of perpetual poverty, especially plagued by the Depression. In 1929, the average per capita income in the American Southeast was $365, the lowest in the nation. Southern farmers averaged $183 per year at a time when farmers on the West Coast made more than 4 times that. Moreover, they were trapped into the production of cotton and corn, crops that depleted the soil and returned ever diminishing profits. Despite the ceaseless effort of civic boosters, what little industry the South had remained low-wage, low-skilled, and primarily extractive. Southern workers made significantly less than their national counterparts. 75% of non-Southern textile workers, 60% of iron and steel workers, and a paltry 45% of lumber workers. At the time of the crash, Southerners were already underpaid, underfed, and undereducated. Major New Deal programs were designed with the South in mind. FDR hoped that by drastically decreasing the amount of land devoted to cotton, the AAA would arrest its long-plummeting price decline. Farmers plowed up existing crops and let fields fallow, and the market price did rise. But in an agricultural world of landowners and landless farm workers, such as tenants and sharecroppers, the benefits of the AAA bypassed the Southerners who needed them most. The government relied on landowners and local organizations to distribute money fairly to those most affected by production limits. But many owners simply kicked tenants and croppers off their land, kept the subsidy checks for keeping those acres fallow, and reinvested the profits in mechanical farming equipment that further suppressed the demand for labor. Instead of making farming profitable again, the AAA landless Southern farm workers off the land. You know what? In AP Lang, the chapter that we read relates directly to that. There's like the bank kicking off the tenants because like the mechanical zooms, like they zoom in and like they like kick the guys off and then the guy just died. That's great to wrap right there.
Do we think that's unethical?
Yes, very.
What? What's unethical? Wait.
If you're a business owner, to move away from labor and move towards.
That's not what this is about.
I feel. Well,
Okay,
I mean, like,
that's my question then.
well, gradually doing it is fine, I think, but like doing it that quickly, like just like especially like in a time when like the economy was that terrible, was like kind of questionable. But like, I mean, it makes sense because like they also had to make a living. But like,
So they,
well,
unless industry and economy is set up to handle full automation and full, otherwise full automation. Wait, no, what was I saying? Oh yeah, unless economy is set up to handle that automation, full automation in industry and such mass employment would cause like major economic collapse.
Right. So even though like it was like good for like those like that certain population group, like it was generally bad. I think I don't know. I don't know enough about like the like economy behind that.
Yeah.
Probably, like, know enough about it.
Yeah, but here it's also unethical that they were taking their subsidy and keeping it for themselves.
Yeah,
That's
the
not-
subsidy-
That's obviously
yeah.
unethical.
I was just more worried about.
Yeah, I think the actual process of like switching to mechanical labor versus like human labor isn't like that unethical, but like the paycheck part of them like not giving off the paychecks that the government gave them specifically to like give to the tenants, that part's kind of weird. But like, yeah.
So, for a current example, if Apple moved away from factories in China and started having all their phones made by robots, is that good or bad?
I'd argue that that's well, actually, well, there's
If
like
they're
the
using
human.
robots, it doesn't matter where they are, even if they're in the U.S., they're not going to benefit the local economy because they're not going to be paying workers. So,
Yep.
regardless of where they are in China or the U.S., they're going to
No.
be not supporting the economy.
Well, like
Okay, so
ethically,
my
I think
point-
that actually
my
might be a
point
bit
My
better.
point is that
Josh.
most of
It might definitely be better because, like, if like especially if, like the working conditions like in China and those factories are bad, then like replacing it with robot labor might be better.
that's my
But,
point.
but at the same time, they're going to be pulling out of the economy, which is going to harm the economy. So
Right,
you're
but like
depriving
if you're
people of
in a
wages.
sweatshop working for like 2 pennies a day, then like.
But at least you're getting a wage. Like, otherwise they'll be unemployed.
So you would say that
So
working in a situation like that is better than.
Yes,
wait,
of
is that
course.
what-
Not at all, yes.
so sweatshops are better than no shops.
Yes,
Sweatshops
because
are better
having
than dying for
yeah,
and hungry.
exactly, having money
Like I
and
mean,
being able to
zombie
live
hair, yeah, I guess.
is better than not being able
Oh
to.
yeah, Estrella says they could be taxed. for automation, which is a cool idea actually.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Unless you.
Yeah, I mean,
unless
the
you
ideal
hate
But, I mean,
utopia
you're
is...
also not completely getting rid of labor because there's people need to be able to fix robots. But
Yeah, like
that's
you need,
more
like, a
skilled.
Right,
That's,
but
that's a lot
still,
more skilled labor though.
That's a lot
and
less
even that
people,
process
too.
may be automated.
Yeah. I mean, you're right, but
And the ideal is that, like, that there's only a small amount of work needing to be done by people, and then the people who are actually managing those automation tasks are, like, good people, and they let everyone else just live happily and reap the benefits of automation, but I don't know how realistic that is.
That's a
not
very
realistic.
unlikely. That's a very utopian.
Yeah.
That's like a super idealistic idea. Like, oh, we'll all just live happily in harmony.
how?
Yeah.
But how are other people supposed to make money, or are they not?
They
supposed to?
don't need to make money because
okay,
all their products are. It's like a commune sort of, but everything's automated.
Yeah.
So you have to trust people.
I'm not gonna lie.
You have to trust people not to hoard and to make sure that.
Socialism.
Yeah. So it's
that's what it is.
definitely got some flaws.
Automated socialism.
Robot socialism.
Is that a thing? Wait.
Is robot socialism a thing? Wait, what?
Robot socialism.
Robot socialism.
Yeah, fully automated luxury commune. There's an article in the
Of course there is.
That's amazing.
Robot communism.
I'd be down for that.
Just let the robots take over all the work and just like chill out.
Yeah.
Communism
I'd
is
just
great
be
on
chilling
paper, but not great in.
Yeah, it's good on paper, but then like when it actually happens,
Well,
it doesn't work.
Like Miss Maxon was saying, it depends on
Gulag time.
the execution and the size of the
Gulag time.
action.
Gulag
Gulag
time.
time. Yes.
Yep, gulag time.
Yay.
Alright, let's get back to the
All
chapter.
right. Yeah.
Okay.
Chapter time.
Okay, but Roosevelt's assault on Southern poverty took many forms. Southern industrial practices attracted much attention. The NRA encouraged higher wages and better conditions, and began to suppress the rampant use of child labor in Southern mills, and for the first time provided federal protection for unionized workers all across the country. That's important right there, that they provided federal protection for unionizers, because like that was like a huge thing in like the Gilded Age and like pre 1900s. Like that's like, a huge thing of like the bigger companies like destroying the unions, like the ultra unions.
Yeah.
So, like federal protection of unions is like important. Those gains were essentially solidified in the 1938 Fair Labor
Hold on.
Standards
Whoa!
Act.
Oh, you're underwater, Daniel.
I'm underwater.
Uh,
What?
you were like, I don't know. The sound was really bad for a second.
Oh, that's because like I like raised my arms. I don't know. But anyways, this is like another important thing. Like the Fair Labor Standards Act is still like in place today, if I'm not mistaken. So,
Yeah.
those gains were eventually solidified in the 1938 Fair Labor Standards Act, which set a national minimum wage of 25 cents per hour, eventually rising to 40 cents per hour. The minimum wage disproportionately affected low-paid Southern workers and brought Southern wages within the reach of Northern wages. So that was cool for Southern people.
I mean, yeah, there's still a federal minimum wage today, even if it's like $7.
Well, I mean, that's California is crazy. You have to
Well, yeah, there is that, but $7 isn't that much in still a lot of states. So
It's well, it depends on which state you're
It's
in.
a lot. Like it's pretty good actually.
I know it goes further in
Yeah,
other
it
states,
depends on the state.
definitely. California
Yeah, it
is
goes-
definitely
if,
whack.
if you're living in Nebraska, $7 goes like a lot further than it does in California.
Yeah. Dude, remote
Okay.
working for a California firm from Nebraska. Talk
It's
about a
very
dream
good,
job.
actually.
Yeah.
That's the strategy right there.
Dude, Estrella, you want to sleep? No sleep.
Sleep is
Only
for
sleep.
nerds.
It's only
If I
8:34.
want to sleep.
Hurry up, I want to sleep.
No, you can't
It's only
rush the chat.
8:30.
Yeah,
You
what? What's
can't rush
going on
the
over
chat.
there?
If you're in the chat, you gotta enjoy the chat.
Yeah, you just gotta chill.
It's part of
Yeah,
this,
chill.
the experience, Estrella.
It's
Go with
part of the
the flow.
experience. Alright, the president's support for unionization further impacted the South. Southern industrialists had proven themselves ardent foes of unionization, particularly in the infamous Southern textile mills. In 1934, when workers at textile mills across the southern Piedmont struck over low wages and long hours, owners turned to local and state authorities to quash workers' groups. That's a cool word. It's like squash with a Q in it. Quash. Even as they recruited thousands of strike breakers from the many displaced farmers, swelling industrial centers looking for work. But in 1935, the National Labor Relations Act, also known as the Wagner Act, guaranteed the rights of most workers to unionize and bargain collectively. And so unionized workers, backed by the support of the federal government and determined to enforce the reforms of the New Deal, pushed for higher wages, shortened hours, and better conditions. With growing success, union members came to see Roosevelt as a protector of workers' rights, or as one union leader put it, an agent of God.
Damn.
Wow, that's a high title.
It sure is. Wagner Act is important. Australia knows. Right, so National Labor Relations Act / Wagner Act.
Yeah, that was what I wrote.
Apparently, first mentioned it a few times. That's cool. Probably important for you.
It's not one of the key terms, though.
Weird.
See, I have carpenters, so I couldn't relate, because in carpenters we do absolutely nothing.
Daniel, do you want Ambrose's, key terms or her chapter guide or whatever it's called?
Yeah. You guys, said you'd share them with me, sometimes...
Well, they're on Google Classroom, Daniel. They're on every time Miss Ambrose posts the chapter.
I literally, I just subscribed from Google Classroom, because literally all I get is Ambrose notifications.
I know,
all the
but
things that you're doing. And
did
then
you,
I'm in
leave the classroom?
We do none of those things.
Carpenter never posts on it, that's right.
Carpenter has never posted on it, and she does nothing. Literally, he does nothing. There's nothing. It's there. He's there. Yeah. I'm there. I'm sitting in the class, and then we leave early. It makes me sad. Alright, perhaps the most successful New Deal program in the South was the TVA, an ambitious program to use hydroelectric power, agricultural and industrial reform, flood control, economic development, education, and healthcare to radically remake the impoverished watershed region of the Tennessee River. Though the area was limited radically, was limited. What? Though the area what? 1 second, sorry, I got lost. Okay, though the area of focus was limited, Roosevelt's TVA sought to make a different type of citizen, that of the area's penniless residents. And the TVA built a series of hydroelectric dams to control flooding and distribute electricity to the otherwise non-electrified areas at government-subsidized rates. Agents of the TVA met with residents and offered training and general education classes to improve agricultural practices and exploit new job opportunities. The TVA encapsulates Roosevelt's vision for uplifting the South and integrating it into the larger national economy. Roosevelt initially courted conservative Southern Democrats to ensure the legislative success of the New Deal, all by guaranteeing that the racial and economic inequalities of the region. By the end of his second term, he had won the support of enough non-Southern voters that he felt confident confronting some of the region's most glaring inequalities. Nowhere was this more apparent than in his endorsement of a report formulated by a group of progressive Southerners New Dealers. What? Of progressive Southern New Dealers, titled A Report on Economic Conditions in the South. The pamphlet denounced the hardships brought by the Southern economy. In its introductory letter to the report, Roosevelt called the region the nation's #1 economic problem, and blasted reactionary Southern anti-New Dealers. He suggested that the New Deal could save the South and thereby spur a nationwide recovery. The report was among the first broadsides in Roosevelt's coming re-election campaign that addressed the inequalities that continued to make Southern and national life.
Woo! Sick. Okay, Roosevelt.
Woo!
Yeah.
Y'all still typing or y'all good?
One second.
That was Nick. Good news. There's no more long sections. Every single section left.
All the other ones are actually the equal rights and the New Deal are kind of.
They're medium. They're not as long as the ones we just.
Yeah.
I don't think we have to take any notes on Appalachia.
Why not?
I'll still read it, but yeah, you guys can just chill and listen. All right. Section 9, the New Deal in Appalachia. The New Deal also addressed another poverty-stricken region, Appalachia, the mountain and valley communities that roughly follow the Appalachian mountain range from southern New York to the foothills of northern Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. Appalachia's abundant natural resources included timber and coal, were high in demand because the country's post-Civil War and industrial expansion. But Appalachian industries simply extracted these resources for profit in far-off industries, depressing the coal-producing areas even earlier than the rest of the country. By the mid-1930s, with the Depression suppressing demand, many residents were stranded in small, isolated communities whose few employers stood on the verge of collapse. Relief work from the FERA reported serious shortages of medical care, adequate shelter, clothing, and food. Rampant illnesses including typhus, tuberculosis, pneumonia, and venereal disease, as well as childhood malnutrition, further crippled Appalachia. Several New Deal programs targeted the region. Under the auspices of the NIRA, Roosevelt established the Division of Subsistence Homestead, the DSH. That's probably somewhat important. I don't know if you want to write about Appalachia, but if you do, like, within the Department of the Interior to give impoverished families an opportunity to relocate back to the land. The DSH established 34 homestead communities nationwide, including the Appalachian regions of Alabama, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and West Virginia. The CCC contributed to projects throughout Appalachia, including the Blue Ridge Parkway in North Carolina and Virginia, reforestation of the Chattahoochee National Forest in Georgia, and state parks such as Pine Mountain Resort State Park in Canada. Pine Mountain Resort State Park in Canada. The TVA's effort aided communities in Tennessee and North Carolina, and rural electric administrations are electricity to 288,000 rural houses.
What is the CCC?
I think you took notes on it earlier, but I forget exactly.
We did.
I'm 99% sure you guys took notes on it earlier. Here, let me
Okay, wait, hold on. Yeah, CCC is Civilian Conversation. Conservation Corps.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the conversation.
It employed young men. Yeah, so it employed young men to do random
Okay.
stuff around the community.
Cool. That's actually cool, dude. Once again, Roosevelt being a G.
Yeah.
Roosevelt being a G. Alright. Next up, we got Section 10. We're almost done. Voices of protest. This is the anti-New Dealers. Alright. Despite the unprecedented actions taken in his first year in office, Roosevelt's initial relief program could often be quite conservative. He had usually been careful to work within the bounds of presidential authority and congressional cooperation. And unlike Europe, where several nations have turned towards state-run economies and even fascism and socialism, Roosevelt's New Deal demonstrated a clear reluctance to radically tinker with the nation's foundational economics and social structures. Many high-profile critics attacked Roosevelt for not going far enough, and in the beginning of 1934, Roosevelt and his advisors were forced to respond. Senator Huey Long, a flamboyant Democrat from Louisiana, flamboyant, what an absolute cool man, was perhaps the most important voice of protest. Long's populist rhetoric appealed to those who saw deeply rooted but easily addressed injustice in the nation's economic system. Long proposed a Share Our Wealth program, in which the federal government would confiscate the assets of the extremely wealthy and redistribute them to the last small off through a guaranteed minimum income. Sounds like socialism.
Yeah, literally.
How many men ever went? Literally, yeah. How many men ever went to a barbecue and would let one man take off the table what's intended for 9/10 of the people to eat? He asked. Over 27,000 Share Their Wealth clubs, that's literally just socialism, sprang up across the nation as Long traveled the country, explaining his program to crowds of impoverished and unemployed Americans. Long envisioned the movement as a stepping stone to the presidency, but his crusade ended late in 1935 when he was assassinated on the floor of the Louisiana State.
Oh my god!
He was assassinated on the floor of the Louisiana State Capitol. Oh gosh. Whoa. Even in death, however, Long convicted Roosevelt to more stridently attack the Depression and American inequality. Wait, he just got assassinated in the middle of a court report. Oh gosh. Okay.
Wait, I want to look into this. How often does that happen?
I don't think it happens that often.
Huey Long assassination.
How was he assassinated? Wait. So this dude was literally he was in a court. He was in the state capitol and he just got assassinated.
You know it.
Wow, he had a lot of enemies. Like they wanted an armed insurrection,
Oh my
and
gosh.
he got many death threats and arson attempts, a drive-by shooting.
Jeez.
Wow.
He
This
beefed
guy's
up his
awesome.
personal security. Okay, he was in the state capitol, and someone named Dr. Carl Weiss approached Huey in a corridor and shot him at a close range in the abdomen.
That's the guy that made the Vice YouTube channel.
Weiss was killed instantly by his bodyguards,
What?
Whoa.
Oh,
and Huey died 2 days later. Wow, okay.
I thought his bodyguards killed him.
Who's giving up on you?
Hey, you got shot. I'm gonna kill you again.
Alright, but Huey Long was not alone in his critique of Roosevelt. Francis Townsend, a former doctor and public health official from California, promoted a plan for old age pension, which he argued would provide economic security for the elderly, who disproportionately suffered poverty, and encouraged recovery by allowing older workers to retire from the workforce. Reverend Charles Coughlin, meanwhile, a priest and radio personality from the suburbs of Detroit, Michigan, gained a following by making vitriolic, anti-Semitic attacks on Roosevelt for what?
Oh,
for
nice.
Whoa, cool.
Very
on
nice.
Roosevelt for cooperating with banks and financiers and proposing a new system of social justice through a more state-driven economy instead. Like Long, both Townsend and Coughlin built substantial public followings. Yay! As many Americans urged Roosevelt to go further in addressing the economic crisis, the president faced even greater opposition from conservative politicians and business leaders. By late 1934, complaints increased from business-friendly Roosevelt's willingness to regulate industry and use federal spending for public works and employment programs. In the South, Democrats who had originally supported the president grew more hostile toward the program that challenged the region's political, economic, and social status quo. Yet the greatest opportunity came from the Supreme Court, filled with conservative appointments made during the long years of. By early 1935, the court was reviewing programs of the New Deal. On May 27th, a day Roosevelt supporters called Black Monday, the justices struck down one of the president's signature reforms. In a case revolving around poultry processing, the court unanimously declared the NRA unconstitutional, and at 1936 the AAA fell.
Oh.
Rip
Damn.
Why?
the NRA and
They
the
just
AAA.
got sick of it?
Okay, more research required.
More research required.
Do I need to do it?
Why did the fail? Why was the AAA constitutional? Yeah, probably fine. Ruled unconstitutional.
NRA.
Supreme Court decided the act was unconstitutional for levying this tax on the processors, only to have it paid back to farmers. So the processors were taxed, and taxes were being paid to the farmers as a part of the subsidies,
So you can't tax people
and give the
There's
money
some
to
laws-
other people.
Yeah, you can't tax people. Give them.
Oh, that makes sense. That honestly, that makes sense.
Yeah, that actually does make sense. That's a little
But
bit of a bad idea.
okay, it does make sense. But like, definitely cases where that's violated. Like if you live in, I don't know. I guess I don't know.
Like direct payment, that doesn't really happen.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, that makes sense. But like,
technically, tax money does go in billions of dollars in subsidies for corporations, though. But it's unconstitutional if individuals get it. Yet corporations have the rights of individuals, which is a little bit wacky.
corporations have more rights.
Ultra
That's how
wacky.
that works.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, don't corporations technically have like the same rights as like citizens or something?
They
More,
only have
yeah.
more.
Yeah.
Woo!
Alright, y'all ready?
Yeah. Wait, how many more
Yeah.
sections are there? One,
Wait, is
two,
this Trace still
3,
here?
4.
3,
Jesus
4.
Christ.
I
Hey.
think so. She is on and off. Like, there's a whole bunch of people on the AP Line group chat that like are like saving this for later. They're gonna watch it later, which is kind of cool, actually. Like,
I
Yeah,
don't
it's
know if
cool.
they're gonna watch a 2-hour video, but you know, you do you.
How
no,
long
like
is
just
it
like
now?
there's people.
We're at
It's not
143
too
right
long.
now.
Oh man, it is getting late.
Yeah,
we,
it's
should,
Trace.
we should get this over with.
We've got
Well,
4 more.
this is
I mean, it
the
is the
longest
longest
section.
chapter, so.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
and
a lot
we're
faster
almost
than
done.
if we weren't
Do you
doing
want
it.
to take a break,
Exactly.
actually? Like, and do it, pick it up tomorrow or something?
No, we're almost done. No.
No, we're almost
Okay.
done.
All right. You know,
Unless
we're
you
just gonna
have
zoom
like
through-
specific
okay.
homework to do, but.
I don't think
All
we
right,
do.
section 11. I have to do an APUSH test, but like, don't worry about that. All right, the Second New Deal, 1935 to 1936. Facing re-election and rising opposition from both the left and the right, Roosevelt decided to act. The New Deal adopted a more radical, aggressive approach to poverty. The Second New Deal In 1935, hoping to reconstitute some of the protections afforded workers and the now defunct NRA, Roosevelt worked with Congress to pass the National Labor Relations Act, known as the Wagner Act for its chief sponsor, New York
Wait, what? This
Senator
already happened.
Robert Wagner. Yeah, we already talked about that. I don't know why it's repeating itself. Come on,
Okay.
y'all. Offering federal legal protection for the first time for workers to organize unions. 3 years later, Congress passed the Fair Labor Standards Act, creating the modern minimum wage. The Second New Deal also oversaw the restoration of a highly progressive federal income, mandated new reporting requirements for publicly traded companies, refinanced long-term home mortgages for struggling homeowners, and attempted rural reconstruction projects to bring farm incomes in line with it. The labor protections extended by Roosevelt's New Deal were revolutionary. In northern industrial cities, workers responded to worsening conditions by banding together and demanding support for workers' rights. In 1935, the Union of the United Mine Workers, John L. Lewis, took the lead in forming a new nation workers organization, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, CIO. That's the CIA. Like, what the heck? Breaking with the more conservative, craft-oriented AFL. The CIO won a major victory in 1937 when affiliated members of the United Automobile Workers, UAW, struck for recognition and better pay and hours at a General Motors plant in Flint, Michigan.
Hey,
And the first... Hey,
Flint, Michigan, they always have some sort of problems.
Michigan always has some sort of problems. Oh gosh. Across the country, unions and workers took advantage of the New Deal's protections to organize and win major concessions from employers. The signature piece of Roosevelt's Second New Deal came the same year in 1935. The Social Security Act provided for age-old pensions, unemployment insurance, and economic aid based on needs to assist both the elderly and dependent children. The president was careful to mitigate some of the criticism from what was at
Hey,
the
guys.
time. And,
Yeah.
yeah.
I have to go deal with tortoise.
The tortoises. Have
Yes.
fun with tortoises.
Okay.
Yeah, we're like almost done. We can show you the notes.
Yeah, and also can you like review what happened to me, basically?
Sure.
We can talk a break, yeah. Or you could tune into the live stream and rewatch the last like 10 minutes or whatever.
Alright, see ya in a bit.
All right, have fun with the tortoises.
Well, they're like burn victims, so.
Oh my god! Wait.
Aw.
Oh,
Yeah.
wait, poor tortoises.
Alright,
Aw.
see you guys soon.
See ya.
Okay. That was so sad. Okay, I don't know why I'm laughing because I'm saying that. The president was careful to mitigate some of the criticism from what was at the time, in the American context, a revolutionary concept. He specifically insisted that Social Security be financed from payroll, not the federal government. No dole, Roosevelt said repeatedly, mustn't have a dole. He thereby helped Social Security separate Social Security from the stigma of being an underserved welfare entitlement. While such a strategy saved the program from suspicions, Social Security became the centerpiece of the modern American social welfare state. It was the culmination of a long progressive push for government-sponsored social welfare, an answer to the calls of Roosevelt's opponents on the left for reform, a response to the intractable poverty among America's immediate people, and a recognition that the government would now assume some responsibility for the economic well-being of its citizens. But for all of its groundbreaking provisions, the Act and the larger New Deal, as well, excluded large swaths of the American population. Alright, 2 sections left. Actually, 1 section left.
Okay,
Oh,
I have a
it's done.
question before we.
Yes.
So it says that the Social Security was to be financed by payroll and not from the U.S. government.
Yeah.
Wasn't one of the things? One of the reasons Social Security was created was to help to give the government more money.
No.
Well, I think no. It's like whenever you get a paycheck, like a certain amount of the money that would normally go to you is like put into Social Security.
Yeah,
Like,
no, I
instead
know
of,
how
like,
that works.
yes.
But doesn't the government take?
I don't think they make a profit off of that. I
They
mean,
don't make a
probably
profit off
they
of it,
do,
but
like-
they do use it. No, they don't use it. They use current Social Security to pay for like people who
previous
currently need it.
Yeah.
People who
No.
So
previously
it's
paid
kind of
into
like
it.
it's weird, but like I don't think they like make money off of it. I think
don't
it's just
think
kind of
they
like
do,
a
yeah.
thing there. Like they might like in like the process like make some like money just from like some random government officials, but like it's not like meant to like make money. It's for like just like Social Security. So just relax, like your eyes.
I've
I
paid
thought it was-
$36 to Social Security this year. Ah.
Nick, when you're like old and like 70 years old, you'll get $35 back.
I know.
Whoa.
It's so cool.
So the government took $1.
Oh wait, yeah, I'm just bad at math. Never mind. Okay. Yeah, so you don't get $100.
Why helpful?
What?
Why is this helpful for people?
Why is what helpful?
Because then when you retire, you have money because people aren't very good at making savings
Right,
accounts.
exactly. So like once you're,
But why
because
don't
if you
people
retire,
just create savings accounts?
Because nobody is capable of doing that, Josh.
yes, they
Literally
are. I do
anyone
that.
who retires, Nick.
Yeah.
I guess it's just like for the people that aren't like responsible. for that,
It
and, like,
probably
can't
shows
do it.
that people aren't very good at. Oh, good night, Estrella. It probably shows that people aren't good
Shut
at
up, no.
savings. So that's that. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either. All right. Well, anyways,
Let's go.
section: equal rights and the New Deal. The Great Depression was particularly tough for non-white Americans, as African American pensioner,
Yeah.
told interview Studs Terkel. I don't know what I'm saying. These are wacky words. The Negro was born in Depression. It didn't mean too much to him. The Great American Depression only became official when it hit the white man. Black workers were generally the last hired when business expanded production, and the first fired when business experienced a downturn. In 1932, with the national unemployment average hovering around 25%, that's pretty bad, black employment reached as high as 50%, while
Jeez.
even black workers who kept their jobs saw their already low wages cut dramatically. Blacks faced discrimination everywhere but suffered especially severe legal inequalities in the Jim Crow South. In 1931, for instance, a group of 9 young men riding the rail between Chattanooga and Memphis, Tennessee, were pulled from the train near Scottsboro, Alabama, and charged with assaulting 2 white women. Despite clear evidence that the assault had not occurred, and despite one of the women later recanting, the young men in a series of sham trials, all but one sentenced to death. Only the communist-oriented International Legal Defense (ILD) came to the aid of the Scottsboro boys. Oh, actually, the Scottsboro boys are like a somewhat important thing. Like I've heard that mentioned multiple times.
Yeah,
like,
me
just,
too.
Yeah. Who soon became a national symbol of continuing racial prejudice in America and a rallying point for civil rights-minded Americans. In appeals, the ILD successfully challenged the boys' sentence, and the death sentences were either commuted or reversed, although the last of the accused did not receive parole until 1906. Despite a concerted effort to appoint black advisors to some New Deal programs, Franklin Roosevelt did little to directly address the difficulties black communities face. To do so openly would provoke Southern Democrats and put his New Deal coalition, the uneasy alliance of national liberals, urban laborers, farm workers, and Southern whites, at risk. Roosevelt not only rejected such proposals as abolishing poll tax and declaring lynching a federal crime, he refused to specifically target African American needs in any of his larger relief and reform packages. As he explained to the National Secretary of the NAACP, I just can't take the risk. Huh.
Ooh.
So he didn't actually do anything like the African American community. He was kind of like he chilled. In fact, many of the programs in the New Deal had made hard times. When the codes of the NRA set new pay scales, they usually took into account regional differentiations and historical data. In the South, where African Americans had long suffered unequal pay, the new codes simply perpetuated that inequality. The codes also exempted those involved in farm work and domestic labor, the occupations of a majority of Southern black men and women. The AAA was equally problematic as owners dispatched black tenants and sharecroppers, many of whom were forced to return to their farms as low-paid day laborers who migrated to cities looking for wage work. Perhaps the most notorious failure of the New Deal to aid African Americans came with the passage of the Social Security Act. Southern politicians chafed at the prospect of African Americans benefiting from federally sponsored social welfare, afraid that economic security would allow black Southerners to escape the cycle of poverty that kept them tied to the land as cheap, exploitable farm laborers. The Jackson, Mississippi Daily News callously warned that the average Mississippian can't imagine himself chipping in to pay pensions. I got lost. Where am I?
This is horrid. Whoa.
Wait. I just got lost. One
The
second.
Jackson, Mississippi Daily News callously warned that. It's in the
I
middle
still
of the
don't know
paragraph.
where I am.
Oh,
Which paragraph? Wait, oh, there it is. Okay.
Perhaps the most
Alright,
notorious.
Fine, okay. The average recipient can't imagine himself chipping in to pay pensions for an able-bodied Negroes sit around in idleness while cotton and corn crops are crying for work. Roosevelt agreed to remove domestic workers and farm laborers from the bill, excluding many African Americans already laboring under the structures of legal racial discrimination from the benefits of an expanding economic safety net. Women, too, failed to receive the full benefits of the New Deal. On one hand, Roosevelt included women in key positions within his administration, including the first female cabinet secretary, Frances Perkins. Oh, that's probably important. Oh, that was like early in the chapter, though. And a prominently placed African American advisor in the National Youth Administration, Mary McLeod Bethune. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt was a key advisor to the president and became a major voice for economic and racial justice. The many New Deal programs were built on the assumptions that men would serve as breadwinners and women as mothers, homemakers. New Deal programs aim to help both, but usually by forcing such gendered assumptions, making it difficult for women to attain economic autonomy. New Deal social welfare programs tended to funnel women into means-tested, state-administered relief programs, while reserving entitlement benefits for male workers, creating a kind of two-tiered social welfare state. And so, despite great advances, the New Deal failed to challenge core inequalities that continue to mark life in the United States.
Well, okay.
My voice died. Alright, we got one section left, boys. We got this. Alright. Blah, blah, blah. You guys ready?
I suppose so.
Alright, section 13. The end of the New Deal. By 1936, Roosevelt and his New Deal had won record popularity. In November, Roosevelt annihilated his Republican child, Governor Alf. Governor Alf Landon of Kansas, who lost in every state save Maine and Vermont. The Great Depression had certainly not ended.
Oh my god.
Nick,
These are so heavy.
Nick, you made it back from the turtle saving.
They're like
adventures.
70 pounds.
Yeah, tortoises are kind of chonky.
Where are you?
We
are
are on the end of the New Deal.
We just started the end of the. Yeah.
9, 8, 13.
Yeah, I can do math.
Yeah,
Oh.
we're almost done. Alright.
Okay, wait.
Nick, you good? Oh, wait. Nick, you
Hold
good?
up. And is this the end of the second New Deal?
No, we're way ahead of that. We're at the end of the. It's scroll all the way down. It's section 13.
No, I see it. But is the end of the New Deal? What New Deal does that refer to?
Well, the second New Deal is just the part of the New Deal. So I think
In
it's the end of,
general?
the entire New Deal. Yeah, just the general.
The
New
second
Deal.
New Deal was just FDR trying to gain more popularity.
Yeah, it was after the Supreme Court shut down the AAA and the NRA. Then Franklin Delano Roosevelt was like, "Hey, we gotta make a second New Deal because the first one's kind of getting shot down by the Supreme Court."
Oh,
So they
carrying
wanted it
forces gives me fast typing powers.
Can we quote that? I'm quoting that. Carrying tortoises gives me fast typing powers.
Alright, I'm ready for section 13.
All right.
Here.
All right, let's go. By 1936, Roosevelt and his New Deal had won record popularity. In November, Roosevelt annihilated his Republican challenger, Governor Alf Landon of Kansas, who lost in every state save Maine and Vermont. The Great Depression had certainly not ended, but it appeared to many to be beating a slow yet steady retreat. And Roosevelt, now safely reelected, appeared ready to take advantage of both his popularity and the improving economic climate to press for even more dramatic changes. But conservative barriers continued to limit the powers of his popular support. The Supreme Court, for instance, continued to gut many of his programs. In 1937, concerned that the court might overthrow Social Security in an upcoming case, Roosevelt called for legislation allowing him to expand the court by appointing a new, younger justice for every sitting member over age 70. That did not pass. Roosevelt argued that the measure would speed up the court's ability to handle a growing backlog of cases. However, his court-packing scheme, as opponents termed it, was clearly designed to allow the president to appoint up to 6 friendly pro-New Deal justices to drown the influence of old-time conservatives on the court. Roosevelt's scheme wild opposition and did not become law, but the Chasten Court upheld Social Security and other pieces of New Deal legislation. Moreover, Roosevelt was slowly able to appoint more amenable justices as conservatives died or retired. Still, the court-packing scheme damaged Roosevelt's administration, and opposition to the New Deal began to emerge and coalesce. Compounding his problems, Roosevelt and his advisors made a costly economic misstep. Believing the United States had turned a corner, Roosevelt cut spending in 1937. The American economy plunged nearly to the depths of 1932-19. Roosevelt reversed course, and adopting the approach popularized by the English economist John Maynard Keynes, hoped that counter-cyclical compensatory spending will pull the country out of the recession, even at the expense of a growing budget deficit. It was perhaps too late. The Roosevelt recession of 1937 became fodder for critics. Combined with the court-packing scheme, the recession allowed for significant gains by a conservative coalition of new Southern Democrats and Midwestern Republicans. By 1939, Roosevelt struggled to build congressional support for new reform, let alone maintain existing agencies. Moreover, the growing threat of war in Europe stole the public's attention and increasingly dominated Roosevelt. The New Deal slowly receded into the back, outshined by war. We're about to hit World War II. Not but like, yay. Alright, final section. We did it. The legacy of the New Deal. By the end of somebody's still typing. Let me wait till you're done typing.
We're chilling.
Alright. By the end of the 1930s, Roosevelt and his Democratic Congresses had presided over a transformation of the American government and a realignment in American party politics. Before World War I, the American national state, though powerful, had become a government out of sight. After the New Deal, Americans came to see the federal government as a potential ally in their daily struggles, whether finding work, securing a decent wage, getting a fair price for agricultural products, or organizing a union. Voter turnout in presidential elections jumped in 1932 and again in 1936, with most of these newly mobilized forming a durable piece of the Democratic Party that remained loyal well into. Even as affluence returned with the American intervention in World War II, memories of the Depression continued to shape the outlook of two generations of Americans. Survivors of the Great Depression, one man would recall in the late 1960s, are still writing with the ghost of those days when things came hard. Historians debate when the New Deal ended. Some identify the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 as the last major New Deal measure. Others see wartime measures such as price and rent control and the GI Bill, which afforded New Deal-style social benefits to veterans, as species of New Deal legislation. Still others conceive of a New Deal order, a constellation of ideas, public policies, and political alliances, which through changing guided American policies from Roosevelt's 100 Days forward to Lyndon Johnson's Great Side, and perhaps even beyond. Indeed, the New Deal's legacy still remains, and its battle lines still shape American policy. We did it!
Hands hurt.
I have a question.
Okay.
Okay.
What did I miss in the Social Security Act and the race deal? Should I go over these now, or do you think you could summarize it?
Literally, all it is that, like, it was not racist. So, like, it was kind of racist.
It was
So,
very
like,
racist.
Franklin, yeah. And, like, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, like, made it a point to specifically, like, exclude African Americans from his deals because he didn't want to, like, make...
You didn't want to make the
people-
South angry.
Yeah, he didn't want to make the South angry, so he specifically, like, excluded, like the specific, like, populations out of, like, his laws.
Including, like,
And he
social
also-
security benefits and stuff.
Yeah, and he also, like, didn't do much for women or something, but, like, that was, like, just, like, a short paragraph. It was mostly about, like, Africa.
Yeah.
But, like, pretty much that, like, he didn't, like, really do anything to, like, help the African Americans. He just kind of, like, he kept the social statuses the way they were before the Great Depression.
And Social Security was useful for everyone else.
Yeah, so Social Security was great for everyone except for African Americans.
What did I miss when I went for dinner?
What?
What did I
You
miss?
missed a lot more.
Yeah. Obviously.
Yeah, you missed a lot, Nick.
Let's see, there was Herbert Hoover in the politics of the Depression, the bonus army.
Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover.
Horbert?
Herbert Hoover.
Oh my goodness.
Herbert Hoover. That's so good. I love that. Herbert Hoover. Oh gosh. You know what? We did it.
My
We sure
notes
did.
are like 5 and a bit pages long.
My notes.
so, like,
Okay,
we did-
wait.
we
This is
took-
bothersome.
we took-
Mine are 4 pages, and I didn't even like. I missed half of it.
Well, Josh is the only one that didn't miss anything because both of you guys missed parts.
Mix are probably like 6. Yeah, they're 6.
Yeah.
But he just copy and pasted.
I
Mix are
copy and pasted
chonky. Oh
parts.
my goodness.
Yeah, all the italicized stuff is copied and pasted.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's all.
So you know what? Although we
it's so
took 2
block
hours,
paragraphy.
we completed
Oh.
the longest American Yawp chapter. We took successive notes on the American Yawp chapter. We took breaks to discuss specific parts of the American Yawp chapter, and we engaged in conversation. So I
Yes.
think that's a win right there.
And it was done in only 2 hours and 5 minutes, so that's pretty cool.
Exactly. That's pretty neato.
It's
we-
slower than Josh's reading process, but faster for the rest of us.
Yeah.
My
like,
reading
that's so
process
good.
this probably would have been about the same.
Okay,
Yeah, it's like way
What is
funner.
your reading process?
he's just fast.
I just read fast.
Well, I think I got you all beat because I do it like after like half an hour I'm done because I just like literally like skim through the entire chapter because
Yeah,
like I
you
just
go
like,
so
I know
fast.
all the I literally don't even need to read the chapter. I don't know why I do, but it's fun.
Just
Yes.
people.
I
I hear somebody. Whoa,
Oh,
Josh!
we're
is that
live
your
streaming
sister?
it.
You're live streaming.
Wait, is that Emma?
Oh, we have to talk about that. Yes, that's Emma.
Yeah, we do actually. Hi, Emma.
Live
Hi,
streaming.
Emma. Oh. Yeah, actually, are we gonna end the live stream and then talk about like live stream logistics? Or are we doing it online?
There are 4
That's
people
it.
We
watching.
should probably like. There's like 1 person watching right now. I think we should probably just end the live and we can like talk about like logistics in Discord and then we can like figure out through us.
Alright, sounds good.
And, like-
Thanks, y'all, for watching.
Thanks for watching. We're
Is there
hopefully
anyone
gonna be
watching
back
still?
like.
I don't know,
Yeah,
it says
yeah.
4 viewers.
Good luck
Yeah.
on the reading
I think
check.
it's just
folks.
us.
Good luck on the reading check coming up Friday. Hopefully we'll be back next week with new, fresh APUSH content. Yo, 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 Butter Creeper Man out. Don't forget to check out all the other Butter Creeper Man videos and subscribe for that juicy
Daniel,
Minecraft
it's not
content.
live anymore.
Subscribe for baby Nick Brandt.
I like
Subscribe
how
for Baby
false
Nick
the
Brand.
advertisement is that it's a new U.S. history.
I mean, is it not?
No. Anyway, that's a good ending. Okay, bye.
Alright, bye.
There and end.